Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai.
And today we are completing the cycle.
It will be complete.
We're doing it.
The cycle is now complete.
How to play blue. After much ado, it's taken us a few years, but we have created 5 episodes.
Oh, good, because I got to spend that whole time, those few years, studying how to play blue. Yeah.
Planning, researching.
Yes.
Studies.
Every game
many
is research,
studies.
yeah.
Today we're going to talk about the strengths, the weaknesses, and the strategies, even some of the staples that it takes to be successful playing the most beloved but also the most hated color in Magic.
Yeah, no other color has so many people that love it and so many people that are like refuse to play it ever. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's a polarizing color,
Divisive.
I might say. Yeah, divisive. Yeah.
If you want to pick up any of these blue cards, go over to cardkingdom.com/command. They have a huge selection of singles, sealed product, all of the blue cards that you need under the sun. If you're building a blue deck, you can go to Card Kingdom. You can buy them all in one place, get them shipped to you safely, professionally to your doorstep. My favorite thing about shopping at Card Kingdom is I can get a ton of cards in one place, and I know that the cards that I order on the website are going to be the ones that show up on my doorstep. They didn't get bent in the mail or mishandled or mispackaged. They're professional, and if something does happen to happen, you have a great team to get in contact with to make sure that everything gets taken care of. So pick up some sweet singles over at cardkingdom.com/command, and you can support the show and get some cool cards along the way.
And of course, once you get those cards, you want to keep them protected and you want them looking as awesome as possible. Mm-hmm. ULTRAPRO is a game accessories company that we trust our own collections to here at the Command Zone. If you go to ultrapro.com/command, you can find all kinds of cool products like, check this out, the Mana 8 stuff. This is a new line from ULTRAPRO. Mm-hmm. Coincidentally, this is the blue deck box. Yeah.
Can't imagine. Did we plan that?
Yeah, did we plan that? Did we think of that? I have the blue playmat in front of me. I got the blue binder down here from Mana 8. This is really cool stuff. Check out the stitching. They've got them for every color.
Wait, let me see the binder. This is my favorite bit.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So they've got them in every single color, and they also have a 5-color one that has sort of an orange lotus on it. On the inside of this stuff, they also have really cool designs.
It's blue in here.
Yep. They match the colors in the binder to everything. It's just really classy stuff. It's really high quality. It's going to protect your cards. They're great for like having people sign if that's something you want to, but also just makes your battlefield look cool. So ultrapro.com/command is the best place to go to find all of that.
Absolutely. And if you want to support the show directly, you can go to patreon.com/commandzone. That's how you join our community. You can get access to our Discord. Come and hang out with me, Josh, Jimmy. The whole team is in our Discord. Plus, you get access to game nights, extra turns a day early without ads. Come be a part of our editing process.
You get to actually see mistakes that don't make it because the patrons often catch the mistakes, tell us, and we fix them in time for release. Yeah.
We love you. Come be a patron. Plus, we shout out one lucky patron every single podcast episode. And this one is dedicated to Robert Flores III. Robert, you rock.
You rock.
Times 3.
Times 3. You rock times 3.
The third.
You and your dad and your grandfather, maybe?
You all rock.
You all rock, yeah.
All right, let's get into it. We are talking about how to play blue. We didn't do them in Woodburg order. We did finish the cycle. So the reason that we do this series, I just want to do a quick preview, is I think it's really, really important for all deck builders, everyone like Commander players, because we're limited by color identity and even, in other formats, it's really important to know what a color is really good at and what it's designed to do so that when you're building, you're relying on the cards in the right color to do the thing you're trying to do. It helps your synergy get better. It means that your cards are generally a higher quality. It's a good thing to know when you're playing and when you're building.
Yeah, I also think not just deck building, but like you said, they're playing. It's really important to sort of know what colors want to do and how they sort of want to be piloted, because that will often inform your play decisions. Like I often have to sort of kick myself when I'm playing red and be like, no, red's an attacky, aggressive color, and I need to be applying pressure because that's where red's at its best and will tend to reward me with other red cards I'm going to draw in the way that they work and want to be utilized. It's not always, right? But just knowing like that is the tendency of the color, that is where it feels the most comfortable, informs what you want, the game decisions that you want to make. And all the time, I will, sort of forget about them, being like, oh yeah, I'm playing this. I need to play this in a different style than I would play this blue deck, or vice versa. And the outcome can often be very noticeable when it's like, oh yeah, once I start to do what the color wants to do, I perform a lot better.
Yeah. Just understanding what your deck wants to do is a huge part of that, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we pick up a deck and we're like, it's a Hydra deck. We want to make Hydras. But there's on a deeper level, you're like, I need to develop my mana first so I can cast bigger things. I want to get my setup +1/+1 counters down early.
Yeah.
And that means that there's going to be a lot of setup before we have a big splashy ending. That informs how you pilot a deck, what you prioritize in the early game, in the mid game, and in the late game. And blue has a very specific style and a very specific tendency when how you play it. So we're going to talk about blue and what that means, what those cards that you should be leaning on, and what to keep in mind when you're piloting a blue deck, whether it's a mono blue deck or has blue in it or it's just splashing blue.
Yeah, we're going to talk about blue, but not necessarily as mono blue all the time, right? Like, yeah, you have to keep blue in mind when you're playing in a deck that has 3 colors but has a significant portion of blue. And I will say blue is one of the colors, maybe along with black, I'd say, that like when you've got that in the deck, it's likely to be sort of your biggest piece of the deck. Just because we know mono blue is so powerful, even in CDH, just like a mono blue shell with almost any commander could be in the mix just because the mono blue shell itself is so powerful. So we just know it's a very powerful color.
All right, so let's start talking about just what is blue in design. What do we think of when we think of blue in Magic terms?
Yeah, it's the mind, right?
It's logical,
right?
It's very technical. It's a lot of information-based, so you have more cards, you have more selection, you have more information to inform your choices, whereas other cards just can't really shape their game as much. Blue has a lot of control over tempo and timing and just what's coming in what order. It's the time color, right? A lot of its themes and characters are around time and manipulating time. The library in Magic represents the mind, like all of the knowledge that you have access to, and blue plays with the library more than any other color as far as like, reordering cards, looking at what's there, maybe not tutoring, but like other aspects of like messing with the top of it and things like that. That's very much a blue thing. And then I'd say also blue is, from the sort of the classic 4 elements perspective, it's air and water. So it's flying, it's evasion. It is be like water, my friend. It is the judo color. Take whatever you're doing and then twist it around on you. You throw a punch at me, and I might use the force of your own punch to hurt you or to do something to you, but it's not going to hit me. I'm going to get you out of the way, or I'm going to deflect it in some way. Yeah, flexible, reactive. I would also say I think we think of blue as very like heady and thinky, but blue is also very witty and tends to be pretty funny.
Yes, yeah.
Like blue can be very pointed and sharp, which is another aspect of blue that I don't think we think about very much. Blue can be snarky.
Yeah.
Counterspells are so snarky.
Yeah.
And that's like part of it. That's really fun.
I think that also leans into the trickster element of blue, the fool you, the deceitful, the illusion part of blue. Yeah, and it's that biting comment, but also like, I'm going to make you look like a fool by doing something. You're going to be the bull and I'm the one holding the cape.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's very much the sort of classic trickster character is very blue character, yeah.
Most simply, Mark Rosewater describes blue as blue seeks perfection through knowledge. To playing perfectly using information along the way.
It tracks for me personally as a blue player. Yeah. I'm probably too much of a perfectionist in life.
What would you say is the most like quintessential blue card?
So we were talking about this before the show, and I think most people would say counterspell. But I actually think it's probably brainstorm.
Yeah, I love this answer.
Yeah, and I think because brainstorm just... When you start to think about brainstorm, and the longer you think about brainstorm, the deeper it goes, right? It seems sort of simple, but it's actually pretty complicated. First of all, you draw 3 cards, and blue is a card draw That's what they're probably the most known for. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then you have to make a bunch of decisions at that point, like which ones do you put back on your library? In what order do you put those back? That's based on the other cards in your hand, the other cards in the deck. And then it can go even deeper, right? Do I have a fetch land or a shuffle effect in some way? Can I take advantage of this in another way? It's instant speed.
Am I get a mill on my upkeep?
Yeah.
And am I getting hand attacked and I need to hide something from my opponent?
Yeah, you can be so tricky with Brainstorm, and it just seems like a simple effect when you first look at it. And then the more you kind of play with it and you see people do things with it, you're holy crap, there are so many ways to utilize it that, I just think there's a reason why Brainstorm's kind of the linchpin of the legacy format, or was for years and years. And, really is just a card that just the more you think about it, the deeper it goes. And that really, to me, is emblematic of the color.
I would also say that, which makes sense for blue, that Brainstorm has the biggest gulf between when you use it badly and when you use it well in terms of what it actually does. Like a bad Brainstorm just means you have 2 more bad draws coming and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
But a good Brainstorm draws you 3 cards.
Yeah, and we've all done that where we brainstorm and we go, oh, I should have put a different card here on top, or I should have done this, or whatever. And you've messed up a brainstorm. And I think that's also very indicative of the color. It's a pretty punishing color, and the gulf between, a brainstorm in the hands of an expert player is one of the most powerful cards that's ever existed in Magic. And a brainstorm in the hands of a new player who doesn't really get all the intricacies is almost a blank. It doesn't do much. And that gulf between, experience and, whether you play it right or not versus not, that huge gap between... it's hard to misplay like a 7/7 flying dragon. You can misplay a brainstorm, and blue kind of works in that way very often, where at its best this is awesome, but if you don't know what you're doing or you make a mistake, which I do still all the time, it can do almost nothing.
Right. Yeah. You're like, well, I've been spinning my wheels for an hour and a half and now I'm dead.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing happened. I didn't really do much and then I died. Yeah.
Something LSV said in the Call Time Limited format, I think about all the time, where he said, it's about the card Behold the Multiverse. And he was like, this card seems sweet, but I'm pretty concerned I'm just going to die while I'm out here beholding the multiverse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm just going to get stabbed in the back while I'm looking at the stars.
Oh, look at that. I'm contemplating the stars.
And dying while I do it in the middle of a battlefield.
Yep.
All right. So before we get into the nitty gritty of blue, I want to just talk about why play blue. Why is it your favorite color to play?
Yeah, I think the number one reason is the fact that it is tricky. That's what I like about it. If I were to boil it down, you get to make a lot of decisions. You get to do things that are sort of skewed off of what Brainstorm, what it's supposed to do, quote unquote. And also you keep your opponents off balance. They never really, Counterspell's the classic one where they're they might have that, but
it can go so much worse than a counterspell in blue.
Yeah, exactly. And I like keeping my opponents off, unsteady on their feet. They're not sure. They have a move they want to make, but they're not sure what exactly you're going to be able to do about it, but they're pretty sure you might be able to do something. And the gamut of how bad this could go for them is all the way to really bad to maybe they actually have nothing. You bring bluffing into it and things like that. And I talk about it all the time on the show how certain cards make me feel safe. I like to feel safe. And blue is the color that kind of makes you feel the safest because it does give you the tools to deal with anything, even down to activated abilities on planeswalkers and stuff. The color does give you tools. There's limitations to those tools, but I think that's sort of intrinsically the thing I like the most. And then, of course, there's the card draw. But I think that plays into it because blue gives you card draw. It gives you a lot of options. You're rarely down to I only have 1 or 2 things that I can even do because that's just how many cards I have in my hand. And blue is usually immune to that problem because it's so good at just keeping your hand full, and that naturally is a lot of flexibility, right? Because at the very least, if I have 6 cards in my hand, there's 6 different things I could possibly do.
Yeah, you hit your land drops, you draw a spell, you have options. Whether you choose the right options, that's up to you. But
that's the hard part.
It's going to allow you to play.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that agency is why a lot of more veteran players play. The longer you play, not always. We know, there's tons of examples. I know Kibler's not a huge blue player. Joe Johnson famously won't play blue at all.
No blue.
And and I think there are people like that. But in general, as you play Magic more and more, people do tend to gravitate towards blue more than they did at the start because not that you necessarily win more, but you feel like you had the tools, because after the game, you're like, I shouldn't have done this, I should have done that, because blue gave me that brainstorm, and I should have chose this card rather than these other two, and it felt like I had a choice. So next time I can play better. Next time I can, and I think all the colors give you this to some respect, but to me, blue feels like the one with the most sort of flexibility of choice, which means the most chances to screw it up.
Yep.
But also that the most chances to have that feeling of, well, if I did C instead of B, maybe the outcome would have been different. And I like having that agency. It was in my hands. It didn't feel, because there's games, and all, you're going to have games like this no matter what, even when playing blue, where you're just like, there wasn't much I could do. I played, I think, the right sequencing and made the best choices, and like their deck is more powerful than mine, or they played it better. But I didn't see the cards I needed to. There wasn't like a sequencing change, a different block I could have made, remove this instead of that really would have changed the outcome of this game.
Sure. Yeah. It's very interesting. Blue is such a tricky thing, and it's a lot about timing, which is what we're going to talk about. So I want to get into blue and what blue is good at. We're going to talk primarily about mono blue for the first half of this episode, because we want to really get to know the color in its purest form, because that's how I think building monocolors makes you a better deck builder and makes you understand things better and makes you a better multicolor builder. But starting with just blue gives you a great base of knowledge to build upon. So we're going to start with, what is blue good at? And the answer is a lot. But we're going to start with the biggest one, which is, of course, card draw.
Yeah, I think card draw is the first thing people think of when they think of blue, right? Which, again, a big reason why I love it.
Yeah. And the thing is,
they're about the mind and knowledge, so.
And the more knowledge that you garner, the better you can play. It all makes sense flavorfully, which I really love about Magic, and I think is what makes Magic such a strong game, is that you think about blue and what it does is what you imagine, and that's why it's so fun. But let's talk about blue, the card draw that blue offers, because it's sort of whatever you want. You can draw off of permanents, like a Rhystic Study or an Insight or a Mystic Remora, something like that. You can draw off of like big X spells, like Pull from Tomorrow,
Geyser,
Windfall, like all
Wheels,
of the it's so you can do spell stuff that draws a ton of cards all at once, or you can even do like cantrips, which are small selections that set up future draws. They
have the best cantrips, not just Brainstorm, but they got Ponder, Preordain, all that stuff.
Yeah, they let you draw cards in the right order is a big thing to think about. Planning for the future, of course. And then there's even card draw, like you can play off the top of your library, like with a reality chip or like various feature site effects.
Yep. There's creatures that draw you cards too. There's the Fairy Masterminds and the Ledger Shredders and the Consecrated Sphinx. They got a million creatures that'll draw you cards.
The looting is a big part of it. So I think the big question is like, blue can draw, but when you're playing blue, how do you know what kind of card draw to put into your deck?
Yeah, I think, that's where you come down to synergy. So if you're a Chulane deck or something that cares about having creatures, then you want that to be a creature-based Muldrifter style card draw. And you're probably not playing, Pull from Tomorrows and things like that, because your card draw is covered by the creatures. And then if you're playing something that, cares about Planeswalkers, well, there's going to be Planeswalkers that give you card draw in blue, or something that cares about, enchantments. And then there's obviously sort of other types of synergy. So Spellslinger decks might probably want the Ponders and the Brainstorms, because you're getting the synergies off of, your Stormkiln Artist or whatever else you're playing. And you're like, the number of spells I cast is important. So, blue's going to give you that. That's a great thing about blue and card draw. And we know, we've talked about for years on the show that the sort of two big pillars of all deck building in the format is like, you need card draw, you're going to need ramp. And blue will give you the card draw. If you have blue in your deck, it will give you card draw in the synergy you want and kind of in the amount that you want for the most part. And so
there's a big difference to me between drawing like a ton all at once, like a Pull from Tomorrow, and a like whenever you do this draw thing that like more colors tend to rely on. Blue can just kind of draw. It's like whenever your opponents do this, like you don't have to do anything to keep those cards flowing. But I always run into an issue when I'm building blue that I'm like, I never really want X spells. And that probably says something about my playstyle just in general, is I'm not trying to like draw 10 cards all at once. I would rather play a big creature and then draw 2 cards for it. But when do you think you put like these big expensive draw spells in decks, because I think those are the ones that are most difficult to reuse.
Yeah, and the big one-time use stuff, Stroke of Genius is a really, really good one that I play quite often because it's flexible in the amount of blue that you need to cast it.
Right.
And the instants are better, obviously, than the sorceries because a lot of blue, and we'll talk about this later, has to do, and it's the color of information, right? And it's not just information about your deck, it's also the amount of recon you can have on your other player's deck. And the best recon you can have is, it's the end step before my turn, so not much can happen between now and when I'm untapping. That's a safe spot to dump 12 mana into this pull from tomorrow. And I think when you would choose to use it is in a deck that has a lot of instant speed stuff. So you're mostly going to be holding your mana open and you're going to stop stuff that has to be stopped. But then if nothing scary happens, you're going to take the opportunity to draw 12 cards or whatever.
Right.
And then also decks that just are creating a lot of mana. So we're going to, well, again, we'll talk about pairings with other colors later, but a Simic deck probably wants a pull from tomorrow. Maybe even a little more than some of these other options.
Yeah. Because
you're looking at setting up a situation where you're going to, my choices might be Flash in a Nyxbloom Ancient or cast Pull from Tomorrow, or Flash in the Nyxbloom Ancient, untap, pass, have Pull from Tomorrow and other things in my hand and be like, okay, now this Pull Tomorrow is going to draw me 36.
Yeah.
And that's what I look at. Mana production and instant speed.
Yeah. And not only like in big ramp decks do you get to draw a lot of cards off of this. Like you mentioned, like drawing 36 cards. It's you can draw 12 and then be able to cast 3 of them. Because you like in these big decks, you can use a lot of cards. I think that's an interesting thing to consider is like, is your deck prepared to use the amount of cards you're getting when you're getting them? Yeah. And like
it's why like blue-green is so powerful, right? Because the limiting factor when you draw a lot of cards is usually the resource to cast those cards, which is the mana. Right. You have a lot of options of stuff that you could do almost anything as far as like you have all the stuff in your hand, but you can't deploy it all. That's your bottleneck. And so, figuring out how to break that bottleneck kind of opens up. Usually you can win then. If you have 20 cards in your hand and enough mana, you can just deploy too many resources for them to keep up with. The other thing I like about draw spells that I guess I didn't mention is like the ones that can win you the game, that can target an opponent and draw them out. So if I just happen to somehow, have a couple of fork type spells or be able to create 70-ish mana or whatever, I like to have I'll often have a Blue Sun Zenith or something in my deck if I know my deck can do that type of thing as like, well, I want to be able to win in that situation or kill somebody. And this now becomes a direct damage spell almost of like, hey, you draw 77, or whatever.
Sweet. One more thing we didn't hit on specifically is that alternate forms of card advantage. So when do you look at future sight effects? Because I think those are sort of the most unique form of card advantage that Blue offers. And in certain decks, some of the most powerful. Yeah.
And I think it's easy for people to not understand how powerful those are until you see somebody with a reality chip cast like 4 or 5 things off the top, because it feels like, oh, it's going to draw me 1 extra card per turn. But no, it's not. Because if you just have spell, and you drew and cast those, right? You didn't use any cards from your hand. A lot of times I think Reality Chip can just go in most decks. It's just that good because of its cost point. If you look at something like Future Sight, which costs a whole lot more mana, I think you want specific synergies. And those synergies are usually like having to do with knowing what's on top of my library being important to me. So even if I can't cast it, knowing what's there helps my decisions for other cards that I have. Things that like, say, flip the top card of your library, put it in a play if it's a blah, 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 or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's where you'd play the Future Sights and stuff. But Reality Chip is priced at a point where it's like you could just play that as a card advantage card in almost any deck and it'll behave like a Ristic Study. I don't think quite as powerful, but in the fact that like even when you have synergy, even when you're like, hey, I want a lot of cantrips in my deck because I'm kind of a Stormy type spell-sing deck, you can still play Ristic Study because it's just that efficient and good at drawing you a lot of cards. And Reality Chip kind of approaches that, right? Do you agree? Like, you can kind of play it, right?
I play it like, especially in decks that have efficient curves. Like generally, the cheaper the spells, the more often I play Future Sight type effects. Yeah. So I know that I can chain a couple of cards off the top, and if I don't get stuck on like a 6 mana spell or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You don't want to play it where curves are really high. Right. Generally. I would say I think I would put in a lot more fetch lands if I'm going to play
for sure
another Future Reality Chip. If that was the only card in my deck that did that, probably wouldn't. But if there's 1 or 2 other cards where I'm looking at the top of my library, then the more fetch lands you have, the better it becomes, because now if I don't like that card, I have a chance to cycle
Reset,
it away,
yeah.
look at a different card, yeah.
Everything becomes a cantrip when you can see the top of your library.
Yeah, and the cost of putting fetch lands in is low. And
yeah.
I mean, you know, obviously the great fetch lands, but even like other fetch lands, like I might throw a couple of sort of the slower ones in, just because that advantage of basically seeing an extra card, even if that only happens like twice a game, is pretty good off of your land drop.
Cycling an Ash Barrens, like cracking a Shire Terrace is a colorless land that you can tap for mana and then crack it if you need to shuffle, so you don't have to crack it immediately to use the land. There's definitely other ways that you can build around those kinds of effects. I also Stormy decks, I think, is when I think about casting stuff off the top.
Because you've got like 41 drops or whatever.
Yeah, and you don't have room for like these big X spells that'll draw you a ton of cards that you need. You need access to a ton of cards, and you don't want to spend a ton of mana to get them. So especially if you're like, I just need spells, I don't care what order they show up in, that's when your reality
I don't really care what
up.
they are. I just need to have cast X amount of spells.
Like Dragon's Approach, get me off the top of the library. I don't care which selection means nothing. I have 25 of the same card in my deck.
Just to go back one more thing, so there's one thing we didn't mention, which is looting, which Blue's really good at, and I think that the synergies there are graveyard synergies, right? So if your deck cares about certain cards, Delirium could also, Threshold could be in there as well. Delve, you got Delve in your deck or whatever. Looting is when you draw a card and then discard a card. It's card selection, it's not card advantage, but it is a form of card draw. It will trigger things that trigger off of card draw, and also that's another case where, you know, the synergy really matters. So if I'm in a blue-black deck, I probably want a decent amount of looting. And then there's, you know, obviously other strategies that just want specific things in there. Yeah,
I mean, my Octavia deck has a ton of card draw. Most of it is looting.
Yeah, because you reduce the cost.
I'm trying to get stuff in the graveyard that makes my commander cheaper, and it makes the whole deck. There's a lot of flashback spells. So it's something you can really build around. Even in blue, which you don't really think of as like a graveyard color, does use the graveyard, especially for like non-permanent based strategies.
Instants and sorceries for sure in there often matter to triggering other cards, or you can get those back.
If blue is famous for card draw, it is certainly famous for counterspells. The next thing that blue is uniquely good at is on the stack interaction. So what we're talking about here is counterspells for the most part.
Yeah, and there's a few exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, this is blue's realm and their realm only.
They can stop a thing before it happens, essentially. And that's, you know, again, it has something to do with blue's control over time and perception and knowledge, being able to anticipate, that kind of thing. So we think of this as Counterspell, Arcane Denial, Swan Song, that kind of thing. A lot of efficient interaction spells that can stop things on the stack. But blue can even exile spells from the stack, like a Mind Break Trap. It can bounce spells from the stack with a Venser, or the new Sink into Stupor is a great example. So
those are really powerful and I think underrated because there are cards that say can't be countered, right? Well, returning the spell to the owner's hand is not countering it.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, exactly. And so there are even ways around the supposed ways around blue and counterspell. Yeah, and counterspell frustrates new players especially because it doesn't feel fair when it happens. It's like, that is 2 blue mana and anything I was going to do, that stops it. It's not even like I get the ETB and then you kill it, or, you know, usually you cast an instant or sorcery and it feels like that's going to happen. But blue is the one color that's like, not necessarily. Yeah, they can even steal your spell sometimes too. So you're like, I go to remove that, and they're like, never mind, misdirect that. Now you killed your own thing. That's the judo part of it that I was talking about earlier. And so that's I think this is the key factor that makes people unsettled when playing against blue and asking, you know, how much mana you've got available to you. And what I love about this is that it causes your opponents to play suboptimally and make decisions that are not their best decisions. Like, do you want to play your best card, your key piece, your whatever? You've got the setup piece out and you have the next piece that goes along with it, but they have lots of mana available, and you're like, I'm going to play suboptimally here. I'm not going to play my best thing. I'm trying to bait out this counterspell. People say a lot, without knowing whether you've even got it. So you get credit, some amount of credit for it, even when you don't have it. And that's a pretty large advantage. Now, it's hard to quantify, but undoubtedly your opponents will make bad decisions. Bad, quote unquote.
It says a lot about the color, where like if a green player passes with all their mana up, you're like, what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, you have all lands in hand.
You got nothing going on?
Yeah.
And if a blue player passes with lands in hand, you're like, oh,
crap.
no. Something horrible's coming.
I've often thought about how it matters a lot for seeding. So when it's a blue player, you do not like sitting to their left, right? Because if they pass with mana open, you're the next person to act. And if you do something scary, they stop it. And maybe they don't have mana to stop Jimmy, or they don't have mana to stop Becca or whatever, but you were the next person. So it's way better to be the person right before them where they had the chances to use their resources before it got to you. And you just have a better chance that like they don't have mana open anymore. Yeah. And you don't think about that much with the other colors, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not. If I'm sitting next to a control player, I'm like, okay, how do I need to figure out how to get them on my side here. And whether that's playing a turn behind or playing suboptimally, like you said, you can't just barrel into it and slam your mana geyser or something when they have 7 mana up, because you could dump your whole hand, put everything on the board, and they're like, all right, I'll bounce that, and I'll untap.
Yeah. And so that stack interaction and that ability to just sort of affect things kind of at all times is a very powerful, and it's just like an emblem that you get as a blue player. You just get all that without really doing anything.
There is a cost to stack interaction, and that's timing. Is you don't know what the problem's going to be before you have to answer it, and you have to answer it now. So I think people think about counterspells as like, that's not fair. And it was like, but I had to anticipate that you would create a problem. I had to recognize it was the problem and get the right problem. And the cost, as usual with blue, is knowledge.
Yep. And if you think about a counterspell as opposed to, let's say, like a Swords to Plowshares, right? Swords only answers creatures, and they get to hit the board, so there's an ETB that happens or whatever that counterspell would stop. But at the same time, if you let that thing hit the board as a counterspell player, thinking, hey, Rachel's not scared of me, she's going to attack Jimmy, it's not that big a problem. And then I'm wrong, and Rachel did see me as the biggest threat and attacks me, the counterspell does nothing against that creature now. Or she plays a second piece later that's like, oh boy,
wasn't ready for that.
I wish that other thing wasn't there. The counterspell, maybe it could have stopped the second piece, maybe you've already used it, whatever. But the Swords of Plowshares is more flexible in that you can let that thing sit there. When it starts to attack you, you could do something to it. You can see what else everybody does because it doesn't have haste, and then do it. The counterspell is like, no, if you don't want that creature here, you have to stop it now, and then you're going to leave yourself open to whatever Jimmy and Becca do, and you don't know what they're going to do. And that is the give and take of the power, right? The power's up here, but the judgment you have to use it correctly is here. And we've all been in games where, like, if I just didn't counter that, I would have countered this, and we maybe would have had a chance to win that game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge. So the power of counterspells is sort of it's also its undoing. And I think that is a big category that we could sort of zoom out and be like, blue's just good at moving at instant speed. It's good at getting information and keeping its options open until it has to act. But it has to act in that moment. So let's talk about just its power, the power of Flash in general, which we've sort of hit on.
Yeah, the real power of Flash in Commander is that it allows you to gather the maximum amount of information before you act. Because if I have to act during my turn, then my information about what the other players are going to do on their turn is obviously less than if I just wait to see what they do. Like, when I'm watching them do it, I have more information than I had before they did anything. And so Flash or instant speed is the last possible instant you can act, which is the most information you're going to have when making a move.
Right.
And Flash and instant speed compounds upon itself in that if most of your deck is operating that quickly, then your options available to you. Like, if you have a sorcery speed 5-drop, let's say you've got 6 mana. You got a sorcery speed 5-drop, but you're at a point in the game where, like, Jimmy's got a scary piece, and if he does, what his deck wants to do, he might be insurmountable. So I can't cast my 5-drop, but the only other thing I've got, let's say, that's relevant is like the counterspell. So now I go, okay, I have to hold this counterspell open because Jimmy might basically win. And then it goes to his turn. He doesn't do it. He doesn't go for it because you're untapped. And now it comes back to your turn, and you're like, well, I can't cast the counterspell into the clear blue air. I also don't want to counter anything from anybody else because I still need it if Jimmy does it next turn. And I did nothing. But if you're in the same situation and the other card in your hand is a flash speed thing, then you're like, okay, Jimmy didn't do it. I cast my 5-mana creature or whatever with Flash, advance my board state, untap, ready to stop him the next time. And that's why Flash and instant speed kind of build on itself.
Yeah.
And if you have a little, you really want a lot.
A great example of this is CovertGoBlue played an all-flash deck in the Elder Dragon Extra Turns episode. His whole deck, it was Esper Flash, and it was a nightmare.
Yeah, so hard to play against.
Impossible to play against.
Yeah.
Because he could do anything. You could stick a dragon or a counterspell, and if you didn't play a thing that he had to counter, well, there was a dragon you had to deal with.
Yep.
You were like...
Anything could happen at any time. It's a
crazy. So the more flash stuff you have, the scarier your deck is.
Yes.
Which makes cards like Leyline of Anticipation and the new Valley Flood Caller
I love this card, by the way.
that make all of your stuff, well, all of your non-creatures in the case of the Otter, move at flash speed. It makes you so much scarier, even though this card itself doesn't really do anything. And I was thinking about this. I was like, okay, how much more flashy is blue than the other colors? And I did some quick numbers on Scryfall. So if we're talking about just cards with flash in general, white has 98 cards with flash. Black has 48 cards with flash. Red has 26 cards with flash.
Oh, man, that's surprising, actually.
Green has 59 cards with flash. Blue has 157 cards with flash on it.
Yeah.
And that's not including instants, which I also took numbers for.
More than double, almost triple everything except white.
Except for white, which they've been giving flash to more recently.
But still almost double white. Like a lot more, yeah.
And if you look at instants, so white has 615 instants. Black has 470 instants, which is almost the least. Red has 586. Green has 467. That is the least. So the highest on that list is 615 for white. Blue has 814 instants that are exactly the blue color identity. I didn't look at two-color
all the other ones
stuff.
are clumped up in the same 150, and then 200 above all of that
is blue.
Yeah.
So that's like such a clear design choice. And I wanted to look at the instants because they've just existed longer.
Yeah.
So you can see the history of blue. But that is a huge amount of cards that gives you more flexibility. And you're like, everybody's got instants. And you're like, yeah, but blue's got
the most.
Instance.
Yeah, exactly. And the most ability then to take advantage of having a lot of the deck be at instant speed, which, like we said, there's a synergy just in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Up next, blue is very good at clones.
Yeah.
Blue's not very good at making its own threats, but it certainly can copy yours. And again, a clone can be anything. It can copy this, it can copy that. It's about choices. So they've got like Phyrexian Metamorph and Phantasmal Image are probably the most flexible of Blue's clones. They lately can copy legends, breaking the rule.
Which is messed up. I wish they'd stop doing that.
They keep doing it.
Let's
like
stop doing
Spark
that,
Double and Irenicus's Vile Duplication, and there's tons. And
I think they got to the point where they're like, well, if there's 5 of these, we might as well have 50.
I don't think so. It's a singleton format.
Feel like. Yeah, I know. I don't agree with it. I just feel like they thought that. Yeah.
So that's like a unique clone ability that Blue has, and then on top of that, Blue can also copy spells on the stack.
Yep.
With stuff like C Double or even Twin Cast, which is a fork that belongs largely to Red, but it can
Narset's Reversal.
Stops
it and copies it.
Yeah. All kinds of ways that Blue can be like, ooh, I actually like that. I'm going to take that instead of what I've got going on.
And to me, this is in the sort of tricky part that I love about Blue, the creative part of it, the fun part of it, which is like you piece together. And I think Blue is often like this, where you're sort of piecing together wins based on, I'm going to operate at flash speed, I'm going to keep my opponents at bay, I'm going to draw enough cards, and then I'll find a win in there, but I don't have a clear plan of like make 10 tokens, give them all plus 10 and trample. But I might be able to do something like that based on like I steal this card over there, and then there's an interesting synergy if I clone Jimmy's commander. My whole deck's not built around it, but these 3 cards I just happen to have are going to do something crazy here, and that's part of the fun of it is MacGyvering together some of the awesome stuff. And then there's the efficiency. I think part of this is the other part of the equation where like Phantasmal Image, hey, you paid 9 mana for that whatever, or what's Nyx Bloom Ancient, 7 mana? I pay 2. Yep. I pay 2, and then I have all my mana available now, and like you kind of wish you didn't play that because I'm going to get better use out of it than you are, and there's that side of it too that's really powerful.
It's cool. I never played a clone deck because they're not super fun to build. They're just like put all the clones in it, and I built a clone deck recently, and it's a very interesting to play. Figuring out like if I clone this, what happens if I get a second clone? What'll that be? Do I just clone this thing again, or is it because you get to play with the best pieces on the board? I think a lot of people say that clone decks are like, oh, it really like bends to the power of the table, and it gets, it can fit in at any table, and you're like, yeah, clones sort of are the highest deck at the at any table they're at, right? Because they're playing to the top end.
They're playing the best stuff.
They're playing the best cards on the table.
Yeah, I would say the clone decks can be very powerful, can look good, but they also can be tough because you don't have the same synergies in your deck that they have.
Sure,
so they can play cards that you're like, that card's really good, but it's still better for them because they have all the ways to trigger it that I don't have as much of.
You have to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun. But I think it does tend. I would tend to agree that like they tend to be pretty fair. It's hard to be super broken. But yeah, there is. It's the classic Sheldon used to love. Say you did this to yourself.
You did this to yourself.
Yeah, and he used to love clones and clone decks and stuff. Because of that, it's like it's hard to complain if I'm attacking you with an It That Betrays if it's a clone of your It That Betrays.
You brought It That Betrays.
Yeah, if you don't think that's fine to do to people, then why did you cast it? Why is it in your deck? Yeah.
All right, we're going to pause right there. We're in the middle of talking about what blue is good at, and believe it or not, there's more to say.
They're good at a lot, yeah.
There's a long list for this one. But before we get to those, we're going to hear a few words from our sponsors.
Sorry I'm late. I had to re-sleeve. Oh, your decks are looking cool.
Oh yeah, I've been loving this new Mana 8 line from Ultra Pro. These Apex sleeves are literally the best shuffle feel I've ever had. And it keeps my cards safe while repping my favorite color, red.
I'll do you one better. I'm showing my devotion to my favorite color, white, with the Alcove Edge deck box.
Ooh.
It's got the symbol on the front and also a cool stylized interior pattern.
Nice. But I think I got you both beat. I've got the Apex sleeves, the Alcove deck box, the padded binder, and this sleek stitch playmat, all in my favorite color.
Josh, that's green.
You play blue?
But with this setup, they won't know that ahead of time. They'll see this big, bold tree, and they'll think Josh has turned over a new leaf.
Yeah, you're not fooling anyone.
People will know. Everybody knows you play blue.
No, they don't.
Hey Murph! Yeah? What color is Josh playing?
Blue.
See?
Yeah, but he didn't even see all my stuff.
Keep your cards safe and stylish with the Mana 8 accessory line from Ultra Pro.
Choose from 6 stunning designs that let you show off or disguise your favorite colors in Magic, all while keeping your collection secure and protected. Go to ultrapro.com/command to get your hands on their premium Apex sleeves, along with deck boxes, playmats, binders, and more.
Support the show and rep your colors with Mana 8 at ultrapro.com/command.
Listen up, fleshbags! You're in the domain of the Lord of Pain! The Lord of Pain less for high-quality audio, that is, with RAYCON wireless earbuds! Look, it can be torture finding things in life that just work how they're supposed to. So when my coffee maker's on the fritz or my Iron Maiden gets stuck shut, I throw them in the pit. But you know what never causes a fuss like that? RAYCON's best-selling everyday earbuds! They just work, and RAYCON keeps making them better and easier than ever. Their new multi-point connectivity lets me pair with 2 devices at once, so I can switch seamlessly from listening to the screams from the rack on my phone to the crunching of Black Vice on my laptop. With RAYCONs, managing my Razorkin empire has never been simpler. The optimized gel tips keep my ears comfy while I spread discomfort, and with a 32-hour battery life, they can last even longer than my victims.
Stop the fuss. Go to buyraycon.com/command today to get 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's right, you'll get up to 50% off everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/command. Again, buyraycon.com/command. Yes! I win! Probably. Anyway.
Probably. What's going on?
I just goldfished a huge turn on ARCHIDEKT. Check it out. They've got the best playtester in the business. Playing and tapping your cards is as simple as clicking them. Everything goes right where you want it, but you can drag things by hand and group them together in different ways too. Then there's easy shortcut keys for things like making copies, sending cards between zones, and starting the next turn.
Nice, so this is a Traxo. All that proliferating's gotta take a while.
It doesn't actually. Just right click and hit proliferate all counters.
Oh wow, yeah, you probably do win.
I think so.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/commandzone. All right, we're back and we are talking about how to play blue in Commander. Next up.
While blue can copy things, it can also just take them. Look, you did this to yourself.
Yeah. Again, this is the trickster.
Yeah, blue is great at theft. It's like it's got this sneaky sleight of hand type of stuff that allows you to yoink your opponent's threats. While your creatures may not be the most powerful on the board, you can certainly get access to them with dozens of like control magic type effects, like auras that steal stuff, or like Thieving Skydiver is one of my favorites lately. A card scales incredibly well.
Yep. Another blue 2-drop.
Another blue 2-drop with flying.
Yeah.
Ugh, that's my favorite. Like, Expropriate is like, give me an extra turn or give me your stuff.
Yeah.
It's
they always choose wrong there, by the way. Always give them your stuff.
And you're like, but I don't want to give them my stuff. Agent of Treachery, even Bribery is like, I'll just steal stuff from your deck. It's like
you
you
can steal
thought
spells
it
off
was
the
safe.
stack, off the stack too. Yeah, and this is powerful from a card advantage standpoint and a tempo standpoint. They spent mana on a thing, and then you're like, "That's my thing," and they didn't just. It's as if you cast the thing and simultaneously destroyed or exiled their version of that thing, and that tempo loss can be very devastating, and also it has that clone effect where it's like, and it's also the most powerful thing on the board right now. So this tends to make people a lot more mad than the cloning. But it is undoubtedly extremely powerful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because that it can copy anything, but it can also steal anything. Like you mentioned stealing stuff off the stack. That's like Narset's Reversal. We already sort of mentioned is bounce and steal. Even Sudden Substitution is like steal the spell on the stack. I'll give you this stinky thing for it.
Yep.
Reigns of Power even lets you like temporarily steal their whole board, and those are the kind of spells that you're like, well, it doesn't do anything specifically,
right?
But in my hand, it feels like it could do anything.
Yeah, you're just waiting for this right moment. Hope you start rooting for things that you wouldn't normally root for. Like, please cast that pull from tomorrow for 12 or whatever.
Yeah,
please
love that.
Yeah, please do whatever. Please, you're often, I've been please try and remove my best thing so that I can misdirect that over there because I want to kill that thing. Like, yeah, that's the fun part about blue is you just start rooting. Please play something big and scary
because this clone does nothing until you do. It's very interesting because you read all these cards and they're like, this doesn't produce a board state unless a board state already exists. But that also sort of makes them more powerful in multiplayer Magic because there's so many more choices.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's 1v1, there's just sort of less chance that your opponent's going off. And if you can't do anything until your opponent goes off, you can sort of be behind there. But in a 4-player game, it's like, if player A is going off, I can match them with this one card.
Yeah. And
now I'm in second. Or maybe first because, who knows? Maybe I just have an anger in my graveyard or something that they don't.
For sure. All right, so you can clone things, you can steal things. A thing that blue does fairly uniquely is mill. We know that blue can mess with the top of the library in lots of different ways. It can surveil, it can explore, it can scry, it can cast stuff off the top, but it can also just eliminate the library in ways that other colors really can't do. Green can mill itself, but not really its opponents.
Black, same thing.
Yeah.
This is pretty unique to blue to be able to mill opponents, and it does seem almost like a mistake because of the top of library manipulation that it also has and wants to do. It's like, should they also be able to control, just move cards off there if they feel like it? Which, again, is very powerful, especially as more mechanics get designed that care about, number of card types in your graveyard or how many cards are in there. And, Dustmourne is another set that has Delirium and some other stuff going on. This mill just kind of continues to get more powerful over the years. Delve comes out and all kinds of stuff. And it's an alternate win condition, too. And one that it's fun, another in the fun column of like, it is another way to go about attacking your opponents that isn't damage. So I know a lot of people just love, and I felt it too, where it's like, if you can try and put a mill deck together and like limit or something and win some games that way, it just feels cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I went 1 and 2, but I won 5 games through mill.
That's sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, why did you do that? And you're like, I don't know.
It was fun.
It.
Yeah, it was fun.
That's why Persistent Petitioners continues to be the type of thing that people love to play.
Yeah.
Is it that good? Not really, but it is really neat.
It's a challenge. It's an achievement that you can unlock, especially in Commander where it's difficult to mill out all the other players. It feels like a challenge you can go after, and you don't have to achieve it very often, even just once in a while, or even just one player. You feel like I did the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cool thing about mill in blue is you have the option to mill yourself or mill your opponent. And I think that flexibility is really neat, where you can have an Altar of Dementia and it can fuel your plan, but also you can turn the Altar of Dementia against your opponents. Obviously, that's a colorless card, but I do feel like blue uses an Altar of Dementia really, really well. And it has stuff like Brain Freeze, right? Where you're like, okay, I can use Brain Freeze to storm off and deck myself and win the game, or I can use it to storm off and kill you. Or in my Octavia list, I'll cast a Brain Freeze on your end step after you've cast 2 spells to mill myself for 9. And you're like, it's not going to win me the game, but there's a huge amount of card advantage for my deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Or somebody goes off and, you know, your main plan is brain geyser yourself or, you know, mill yourself, but they go off like you're playing against me and draw 70 cards and you're like, well, now I'm not a mill deck exactly, but I can mill you.
Yeah,
I can make you draw 15. Like, you got low enough that you're within range of, you know, it's plan C for me, but there you go. I'm going to kill you now. I've died to that a number of times. And, you know, that's what we talk about when we talk about blue. And one of the reasons I love it too is like, it does just give you all these interesting options in the moment. Oh, I can clone that and suddenly do this. Whereas, you know, if you're a green deck and you've built your green deck to do a certain thing, you don't have as much sort of moments in different games where you're like, oh, but actually my game plan this game is going to be this crazy thing that I've never done with this deck before. Because green kind of, you know, presents threats and it's like, no, I'm going to play big things and attack you or whatever its plan is.
My favorite blue moment that I've ever had, I was playing against a deck that had Approach of the Second Sun, and they had cast it once, and it was in their deck, and they drew 3 cards, so I knew where it was in the library. And I was playing a really terrible card in Octavia that's called Bamboozle. And Bamboozle is usually a mill spell that I cast on myself, and it's in the deck because it has tentacles on it. It's not very good, but there it is. And I realized that I could bamboozle them, put their Approach of the Second Sun into the graveyard with my bamboozle, and then set up the top of their library in some sort of terrible order, I believe is how the card works. But either way, it meant that we interrupted the Approach of the Second Sun win by just milling them a little bit. And blue's not great at stopping it because it's a cast trigger on that second one. Yeah. So I was like, oh, we bamboozled them.
They got bamboozled, which is also...
I have never used that card that way before, but that was awesome. And that's the power of blue.
Yep, absolutely. You just find these moments to do, oh, this is going to be good in a way that I never thought about. Yeah.
But it's good now. Up next, blue is predictably good with instants and sorceries. It's good at casting a lot of efficient spells like Ataxian Probe or spells that are functionally free like Frantic Search that untaps its lands.
I love any deck that legitimately is like, I want Ataxian Probe. Yeah. I don't know why.
It's free.
I just love that spell.
It's the perfect cantrip.
Yeah, it's free. It doesn't do much, but it is free. And it does draw you a card. Like, yeah.
Well, it also says like how it gives you the information to make the decisions that make all your other cards better.
Sure. The information is worth something, but like,
you know, how well are you going to use it? That's always the question. This category also encompasses stuff that are just care about instants and sorceries, right? This is your like Archmage Emeritus or your Talrand. It's good at recurring instants and sorceries with Archaeomancers or
Snapcaster Mages.
Snapcaster Mage. I really like Gale Waterdeep Prodigy. That's like when you cast an instant, you can cast a sorcery or vice versa. Blue's also very good at tutoring for instants and sorceries. So it's sort of like each color has a thing where like we can do everything when it comes to this type. Right. And blues is instant and sorcery based.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a very powerful thing. It's narrow, but knowing that, you know, if you've got those things, you build your deck with 20, 25 instants and sorceries, and all of a sudden your graveyard becomes, you know, if you have an Archaeomancer, it's like I'm choosing between the 13 cards in that graveyard. That's close to a tutor now. Yeah.
I mean, it's just recognizing that is blue's superpower. Then you can start to build your deck around that superpower, right? I think if you're running a tutor, even a narrow tutor like a mystical tutor, if you have a mystical tutor in the deck, then you're like, okay, I need a spell in the deck that does this and this and this and this. I need to turn this narrow tutor into a toolbox. Otherwise, it's just a second copy of one card when it could be so many things.
Yeah, absolutely. Give yourself that toolbox. Yeah. And we've all mystical tutored for a demonic tutor at some point, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Blue's also very good with artifacts, which makes a ton of sense. It's technical, it's thoughtful. They're good at creating them. They're good at sort of affecting them, untapping and making them cost less. So
and they can tutor for them too.
They can tutor for them. So red can do it, but also blue has Fabricate and Whir of Invention. All of the mages, Trinket Mage, Treasure Mage, all of those blue creatures. It can make artifacts cost less with stuff like Ethereum Sculptor, or it can use the artifacts to make mana with something like Urza. It can even turn, like, it uses affinity is a big thing in blue as well, so it's cost reduction.
Yeah, a very powerful aspect of blue that maybe just doesn't get recognized as much because artifacts are a thing that just become more and more powerful the longer the game's around. Because just every artifact that gets added to the pool of artifacts is like sort of another blue card in some ways. So yeah, and a lot of heavy artifact decks have blue, and they're using the artifact part to cover the weaknesses of blue, and then blue gives you the rest. And that's like, yeah, maybe you got one other color thrown in there, but it's only like 10 cards because you get most of what you need.
Right.
Yeah. And I find that to be like a very powerful part of it. It's just that all those artifact synergies.
Yeah.
I mean, War of Invention or something, if you play tutors, is so powerful to just count on. You can mystical tutor for it, you can whatever, and now it's like, oh, my other tutors become artifact tutor. So you can build around certain artifacts in a blue deck, just counting on being able to find them.
Yeah, I mean, understanding that, like, if I'm running Fabricate, maybe it's for a combo piece, but I'm also going to run artifacts like sort of the Animist, so I'm going to have a ramp one, I'm going to have a card draw one, I'm going to be able to use this tutor to maximize the synergies in my deck.
Yeah, I often am like, well, I want the Unwinding Clock, and so I'm going to build the deck to be able to just find Unwinding Clock. And now knowing I'm going to have Unwinding Clock, I'm going to put all this other stuff in here.
Right.
That synergizes with Unwinding Clock, which would be a hard card to build around in some colors. But if you've got blue, it's not that hard to build around Unwinding Clock.
Yeah. Blue's also very good at evasion. It can't really compete on the ground. Its creatures are pretty small, even its more like super powerful ones. Like Consecrated Sphinx, you're like, Consecrated Sphinx, and you're like, it's a 4/6.
Yeah, it's moderate.
It doesn't do a ton of damage. But it has the evasion to peck through and deal damage when it counts. So be able to get those combat damage triggers or be able to come in and steal the Monarch or the Initiative.
Yeah.
So it has flying, but it also has ways to like slip by undetected. Blue is also the unblockable color.
Yeah. And the flying is an aspect that we talk about all the time. I know you're a big fan of flyers, Rachel.
Oh, yeah.
As like still underrated. Flying's just still underrated. It's just...
It's as good as you think it is when you first start playing Magic.
Yeah.
You're like, how can it do that? That's busted.
Yeah.
It's still that.
Yeah.
It's still busted.
And we tend to think of our format of like, 40 life, there's 3 players, 5 damage at a time doesn't matter that much. A 5/5 flyer is very strong, and you win games off the back of just sort of like, man, I've just been able to freely attack with this thing the whole game, and it's just chipped in 40 damage.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it was 15 there and 10 there and, 15 over there, but still that got everybody into a range that like, well, then Becca was able to kill Jimmy, and then I was able to do this, and I didn't have to have a Crater Hoof to finish this off because, I love that about blue. It's just incidentally, like your Legislator is just like a 7/9 or whatever, and you're just like, yeah, it's just going to kill you.
It just can.
Yeah.
You have to keep an eye on your life total because you don't really think about blue being the being a damage color, but you do produce a lot of damage if it can fly in over your defenses repeatedly. They're also very good defensively, right? What I like about playing blue is it can steal the Monarch and it can hold it. It can steal the Initiative and it can hold it. Like that combination of evasiveness and defense is so powerful when there's stuff that inherently makes your aggression better.
Yeah, it's a really good point. The Monarch being, a thing that comes up in quite a few games. Also Planeswalkers, just the ability to like... So just having a couple flyers on the field is another way that your opponents just have to think about it. Do I play this Monarch card? They're just going to take it. Yep. Do I play my Planeswalker? They'll just kill it. So just that evasion can cramp down on your opponent's options without you even really knowing it.
Next, blue is very good at literally and figuratively buying time in a game. Literally, of course, with extra turn spells, you can. I'll pay 5 mana. Give me more time. Like a time warp, or it can sort of tempo you out with bounce spells or just stalling type effects. I think you could even think of like a propaganda as like a buying time type of.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Effect.
That's true. Yeah, I like I like to think in terms of buying time during the games. I'm often trying to be like, what gets me to my next turn? Make that decision, and then what gets me to my next turn? Because blue is very good. Their card quality is very high. You're usually drawing more cards than your opponent, and you're just saying the longer this game goes, the more the scales start to tip in my direction. You know, it's that inevitability. Take them out into deep water, you know, and just get them tired.
I can swim out here.
Yep.
Can you?
I'm fine. I can keep going out. I'm not worried about drowning or getting tired. But the other decks and other colors have more of a tendency to run out of gas. You know, obviously not always, but that is I'd say generally blue is going to be better in later games than other colors. And so you're often just like, yep, I'm just going to bounce that to your hand. Oh, I'm just going to blunt this one attack. Yes, you still have access to that card. I didn't exile it forever, and I'm not worried about dealing with it forever. I'm just trying to get to the point where, like, all of a sudden, yep, now I'm going to try and win.
Yeah. Like a turn later, this flyer is not as scary to me. A turn later, I'm fine with you having this mana rock.
Yep.
I just want you to commit it twice to the board. So it's all just sort of about manipulating when you're comfortable with certain threats and how to buy yourself another time. What I really like about bounce spells is they tend to be flexible, they tend to be cheap, and they tend to be instant speed. Yeah. So it's like you can bounce anything that's the problem. They can take care of it when it's your problem. And it's like, you know, it's fine. You can have your thing.
It doesn't feel as bad. It doesn't tend to make people as angry when you bounce things. I think that's kind of an underrated part of it. Yeah, you and I have been sort of blowing the horn on bounce spells for a long time.
They're so good.
Yeah, I actually think bounce spells are in many ways better than destroying a thing too. They often, you know, if they're in a reanimation deck or something, they can't get the same value out of it. They got to pay the mana for it again. Whereas like if it died, a lot of times they're going to get it out in some sort of cheaper or freer manner. So it doesn't contribute to things like Delirium and other counts. Like it just isn't a resource to them in their hand in the same way it is in their graveyard. And so I often find that bouncing something is worse for something than destroying it. It's probably not usually as good as exiling, but it's close enough. And I just think, you know, less experienced players tend to underrate it because it does feel bad like they've still got it. But like you said, Commander's often about time. Some, you know, a 6/6 on turn 1 is crazy. Yeah. And it feels broken, and, you know, when they play their Sarah Ascendant or whatever, and too powerful. And that same card on turn 5 is like, so what?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem in Commander is if they untap with that, it's going to be a problem. And you're like, well, I can make it so they don't untap with that.
And that stops them to not untap with it for 2 more turns because they play it again next turn, then wait for the next untap. That's a long time.
Bouncing a Circle of Dreams Druid is just like I don't have to bounce your threat, I'll bounce your ramp.
And how many times have you done that and they never replay it for the rest of the game because they're like, well, it's not good for, you know.
It's not good now. I have to play something on 4. And I don't want to be mana inefficient.
And they have things to worry about all of a sudden where they didn't. They had an open window there, but now there's this dragon and this other thing, and they're like, I got to get out a blocker. And then it's like, well, now I really can't cast this thing because it's 2 turns from the 2 turns later.
Yeah. I mean, I think the time aspect is what makes blue so powerful. Just being able to control that.
And we should say they literally buy time by just playing extra turn spells as well. The really the only color that has access to just pure extra turns. Red has those ones that'll kill you if you don't. If you make it to the end of your turn or whatever, Final Fortune and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, not many people like playing against extra turns, but it is a thing blue can do and is good at.
Is very good. They're extra combats.
Yeah. And untaps and draws.
And draws and turns. That's the full turn. Yeah, you're right. Blue's also very good at untapping things. I think this is sort of tied into the time manipulation. I think of untapping as sort of like manipulating how it's like sort of half of an extra turn.
Yeah. I feel like this is a mistake in the color pie, I want to say. They should have given them the ability to tap stuff because that's freezing and that's very blue. But untapping probably should have been like green. That's revitalization or whatever. Yeah. But this is the way that they've built the color pie, and it is a very powerful thing.
It's really good.
Yeah.
This is your Opheto Alchemist is like a targeted untap or like a refocus is untap, draw a card.
There's like reset.
Yeah, those are the untap all your stuff like reset, turnabout, Narset's, not Narset's reversal, dramatic reversal. Like all of the untapping your stuff is just like, for me, it feels like rewinding in time.
Yeah, that's probably where it comes from. It feels like they shouldn't have this also, but they do. Yeah, I love playing me like a Gilded Lotus, a Thran Dynamo in a deck that just has like 3 or 4 different cards that will just untap stuff. Because it's similar to playing a few more fetch lands when you have a reality chip or something, where it's like, oh, because once in a while, this untapper taps for 3 because I have, and then I'll play more bounce lands in that deck because I want lands that tap for 2. Yeah, and it just sort of builds on itself. But
yeah, if you're playing untappers just to untap your commander, you should look at other synergies in the deck.
Yeah.
You're playing Lotus Fields or playing big mana sources, where if you can untap one thing, that's a huge swing rather than just untapping one land.
Yeah, for sure.
Finally, we mentioned it a lot, but blue's just the trickiest color. It can do sort of the weirdest things.
Yeah. If they think of a weird effect, I feel like that's like, this is like a weird words to be on a Magic card.
This breaks the rules in ways that we don't traditionally expect.
Yeah, then that will it'll feel right to put that in blue. Because blue just manipulates stuff in weird ways. So the card Exchange of Words.
I love this card.
Yeah, it's crazy. You just exchange the 2 text box of things. And that's like, what?
Yep.
Great design. I mean, it's pretty cool. But I'm sure when they designed it, they're like, I mean, it's got to be blue, right? Like,
yeah. I don't know. I can't think of anything else that changes the rules this literally. I was playing with an Exchange of Words.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I swap the text box of my commander with that creature that modifies its power and toughness, I think I can kill somebody with commander damage.
Yeah, so weird, right?
Which was like, I think, because there was something that says it gets like +1/+1 for each instant or sorcery in graveyards or something like that. And I was like, huh?
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that.
Like, I think I can do that. And then one of the creatures died, and I was like, ow. But it's, you can create those weird situations where you're like, I don't literally know what this card does, but in the moment, it does something neat.
Yeah, exactly. I think Portal Mage is another, you like reassign, what the attackers are doing. It's just really cool, and that's one of the things I love the most about blue, and it's one of those things that goes into like keeping your opponents off guard, is because they probably don't know your deck 100%, everything that's in there. And so there's always that little nagging thing in the back of like, maybe what could they do about this? I don't know. They're in blue. They might be able to do something weird.
Yeah.
And you just have to think about it.
Like, do they have an Aetherize? An Aetherize would be terrible right now. And like, it just, all of the cards have so much flexibility. Like the mill stuff can target themselves or you, and you have to think about all of those options and how it combines with what's on the board. Like, if you're playing against a blue player, you sort of have to play their deck for them in your head with the information you have to see like, what could they have? What would they want in this moment? How would they react if something happens? And it makes it very difficult to play against. Basically, everything bad that could happen when you cast a thing, blue could do it in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm often in a game, I'm like, can blue do, probably. They can probably do something about this.
They can probably figure it out. I mean, I don't know what it would be.
Yeah.
And it's hard to anticipate, so you just have to deal with the consequences of your actions. All right, that's all the things we're going to talk about that blue is specifically very good at. We're going to get into what blue struggles with right now. This list is considerably shorter, but it does have its weaknesses.
Yeah, for sure. I think blue has a long list of strengths and is one of the more powerful colors, but there's definitely stuff it is not good at doing.
And it's really good at recognizing these things when you're building a mono blue deck or when you're building even a 2-color deck, because you don't want to put things in a list that's like blue and white that, you're leaning on blue for the wrong things.
Yeah.
You're like, well, why would I lean on blue for my ramp?
Right. Because blue's bad at ramp.
Blue's bad at ramp.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think that's the biggest thing that blue is bad at.
Yeah.
Is just mana acceleration.
Yeah, exactly. And which is, as we say, one of the 2 pillars. They're really good at one of them, the card draw part, and they're really bad at the ramp part. They have almost no cards, really, that are like pure ramp cards. There's a few. And then there's some that can kind of work that way, like the ones that find artifacts at certain casting costs. So you can get your Trinket Mage to go find you the Soul Ring or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, which I will sort of count that as a ramp card in my decks because it's mainly there to do that. But that's when you're reaching for ramp, right? Like if you're playing a green deck, you don't have to pretend this card will go get this card that is a ramp card. You're just like, no, I just put in like
just play a ramp.
12 ramp cards. Like, duh.
Yeah, it's this is the interesting thing. I think this is where Blue's focus on artifacts really comes in.
Yeah.
Like we talked about Blue's strength being artifacts and using artifacts to ramp, but even like making sure you can find the one that you're looking for and making sure that the artifacts that you're using the strongest with untappers and that kind of thing. So really recognizing that my ramp package is artifacts, and what Blue is good at is finding them, untapping them, and making them cheaper. Okay, then maybe I consider this as like my support shell for the ramp in the deck.
Well, and Blue is saved by the format and just the way the game is designed in that, yes, ramp and card draw are the two important pillars, but card draw is a lot harder to replace than ramp because mana rocks exist, but card draw rocks don't exist. And so there just aren't...
They do, they're just bad.
But there's not very many of
like
them.
Mind's Eye.
Yeah, there aren't very many. They cost a lot of mana, and there's not like 7 for every color at 2 mana like there is for rocks. And so you just have a pretty good alternative. It's like, you know, and most colors are running some amount of that, so it's not like you lose a lot by putting in the arcane signets, the Felwar stones, the mind stones, all that, the talismans and all that stuff, right? And so if you're in mono, it's a little bit harder, but you can still piece together enough that it's not as big of a downside as a color that has no card draw or is not great at card draw, just because that is not available to you in artifact only form.
Yeah, I think that the artifacts definitely bridge the gap here, and the synergy with artifacts helps a lot. I think just building in a way that is efficient is a big way that you can sort of bridge that gap, right?
Yeah.
Like, you understand that Blue cannot make a ton of mana really fast. So building in a way that, you know, lets you, you're just playing with a lower curve, for example.
Yeah, that's a good
like
point.
when I was building Octavia, I had ramp in it initially and then realized all the spells I wanted to cast were 1 mana and my Soul Ring wasn't doing anything. I was leaving Soul Ring untapped. You're like, what?
Because all your spells are 1 blue.
They're all
2,
blue. Yeah. So it's like I just wanted more blue pips. And so I ended up cutting more and more of the ramp in the deck and just making the curve more and more efficient, leaning more on like 2 mana flyers because they're really powerful rather than putting like 4 mana engines on the board.
Right.
Because it's harder to double spell when you're casting a 4-drop and then still have to cast a 2-drop.
Yeah, well, you were talking about Talrand, I believe, when we were talking about it.
I get a huge questions all the time about why I don't run Talrand in Octavia, and it's because he costs 4 mana, and then I need additional mana up to do the Octavia thing, and that's just too... It just strains your mana so much when you don't have that much mana acceleration.
Yeah.
And, you know, the rest of my deck is 1 and 2 mana, so it doesn't make sense.
You just probably played a lot of games where Talrand's in your hand and you just never find a spot you feel comfortable casting it because you have to pay 4 mana into the... 4
mana setup pieces are not so good.
Yeah, it's just like it feels bad.
I would rather cast like a 3 mana spell that makes 2 Drakes than cast a 4 mana Talrand that might make more Drakes in the long run, but also might not.
Yeah, and I might stick my neck out too far here, and this might kind of cost me the game because it might allow my opponent to get an important piece out that I couldn't stop because I put that out or something like that.
So building efficiently, taking advantage of those untappers is a big thing to bridge that gap, and maybe you leaning on that artifact synergy to make the mana acceleration work in a predominantly blue deck.
Yeah, and I would also say, and sorry,
no,
we said
ahead.
ramp is their weakness, and then the whole conversation is kind of about how it's not that big a weakness.
Well,
and it's natural because card draw also is somewhat of a substitute for ramp in that you are going to hit your land drops.
You're going to hit your land drops.
Yeah, and I think that's a really big thing, which is that at least on turn 6, you'll have the 6 mana that you're supposed to have most of the time with blue decks because you'll be leaning towards card draw so much. And other colors won't, you know, some amount of the time we're going to miss their land drops because they don't have as easy a way of just drawing the cards to hit them. So
a lot of what we talked about in the strength section too is about how blue is good at mana cheating, right? It's about playing clones that clone a bigger thing, playing a counterspell that stops a more expensive thing.
Interesting.
So recognizing that blue works efficiently, uses its mana really, really well, and maybe understanding that your blue deck doesn't need a ton of ramp because it plays pretty thin and efficiently. So you don't need 8 mana on turn 2. What are you casting?
Yeah.
And I think that recognition of what blue is good at and how to use it can inform how you build your decks long term.
I think that's another reason why I like where I say that blue wants the game to go longer too, because those just hitting my land drop and being consistent, that adds up. The longer the game goes, the more likely it is the red deck's going to miss a land drop. And
it
once
also
they
makes
miss
ramp worse.
Yeah, exactly. And once they miss one, they might miss a second, and that starts to catch me up in the mana category. So if the game goes to turn 9 or 10 or whatever, now all of a sudden that mana differential could often be in my favor. Now against a green deck or something, maybe not, but yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
The next thing that blue is not particularly good at is removal.
Yeah.
Once a thing hits the board, blue has a tough time of dealing with it. That's why we talked a lot about bounce spells and how we really like them, because blue's good at bounce.
Yeah.
But in terms of blue's actual permanent removal, it has Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Reality Shift.
Yep.
And then Suspend is basically a bounce spell.
Yeah, okay.
And that's sort of the list.
Yeah, it's not good at it.
No.
And it's not, besides bounce, it's mostly creatures.
Yeah.
They don't,
artifact on Resculpt.
Yeah. It's they don't have a lot of, you get an enchantment down.
Nothing.
They're pretty good. Yeah, you're pretty good. I mean, again, bounce maybe.
Yeah.
Planeswalker down. If you can't attack it, it's going to be hard to get rid of that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to be ready for a thing when it could become a threat. You have to be ready before it is a threat, which we talked about is a huge downside of being able to answer anything is just you have to be able to answer it right now, whether you're ready or not.
Yeah, your counterspell won't catch it once it's down.
Mm-hmm. This is a big thing about timing. I think all of the removal spells that we talked about, bounce or even Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, they're all very timing dependent.
Yes.
I don't think I want to cast a Pongify on turn 2.
No.
Give them a 3/3 that they can just...
They're definitely hitting me with it, first of all. And
they can just put an equipment on it and start going. It doesn't solve the thing that you wanted to remove.
Right.
So it's good in the late game when you're removing a big expensive thing, but it's not so good in the early game when you just don't want them to hit you with a creature. So recognizing that what those removal spells actually do for you is slightly different than what Swords to Plowshares does, which says a problem is gone.
Yeah. That's out of here for the game too, exiled.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about it no more.
And I think if you're worried about an equipment maybe, the timing thing, it becomes more clear. If they play a 2/2 and they have a Sword of Feast and Famine or something like that, and you're afraid of the Sword of Feast and Famine, your Pongify doesn't really do it unless you do it at the exact right time, which is
right. You do it when they go to equip, but that means next turn they're going to equip it to the ape, and then.
So timing just makes it so much more powerful and also so much less powerful at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
Okay, blue's also not very good at actually dealing damage.
Yeah. It's the least damagey dealing color.
Yeah.
It doesn't care about it that much.
It's just not worried about it. It doesn't prioritize it. It wants more things.
Yeah.
And all of the things on the board are 2/1s or 1/3s.
It wants to do tricky stuff. It wants to switch text box and, deflect an attack over to there, but it's not super concerned with big numbers on the power. It doesn't have mass pump spells. It doesn't really even have that many just pump spells.
Yeah, I was looking for them, and most of the pump spells are either very new and clearly an intention to give blue some form of pump spell, like a Shadow Puppeteers.
Yep.
Is all of your flyers become 4/4s basically, or even Octavia. Octavia is an overrun in blue. It's whenever you cast an instant, you turn something into an 8/8.
Yep.
But that's not a overrun. An 8/8's not going to kill you most of the time. You're going to need a couple of spells and a couple of creatures. So it the closest thing to an overrun I can think of is Rise and Shine. Take all your treasures and your clues and turn them into creatures. Kill them all at once.
Yeah, animate your artifacts.
And I think that's why, honestly, that archetype is so popular, is because it's a very traditional commander play pattern, which is make a bunch of stuff, make that stuff big.
Yeah, turn that stuff into damage.
Right.
Weaponize that stuff into an attacking creature of some kind. Yeah. And I guess their pump spells are more along the lines of turn all my stuff into this thing. And if that thing happens to be bigger than what they were, it kind of de facto gives them...
Yeah.
If they're all 1/1s and I turn them all into 4/4s, that's kind of like saying give all my creatures +3/3.
Right.
But you are at the mercy of what happens to be around to turn into for one thing. And you might be able to, copy something that you played to make that happen. But as far as deal damage to your face, anything that's triggers and deals damage to anything. Like, they just aren't that great at it. Most of their stuff tends to be small. There are big sea creatures and whatnot, but, you know, they're going to hit you for less, but it'll be harder to block. You know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like you're referring to something like a Sakashima's Will, which just says, like, choose a creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. That's like some kind of overrun that you're like, they're all at the betrays. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
Like, that's a sudden overrun in blue.
It's very blue, though, because a lot of times you're going to use that to turn into something that's like, I turn them all into Ethereum Sculptors, and now I cast, you know, Wormcoil Engine, whatever, for free, you know.
Ha-ha! This will kill you next turn.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think blue sort of uses one-sided bounce wipes, especially at instant speed, as sort of a functional overrun, like a Cyclonic Rift that buys yourself 2 attacks, basically, of like, I'm going to bounce all your stuff, attack with all my things, and then you're all going to set up, and I'm probably going to have one more attack before...
And that's probably enough.
And that's probably enough to win the game. So you can turn this removal stuff, this time buying, into a buff as long as it gets you a second attack. So like using a time warp or like as a second turn or a board wipe or one of those things is closer to an overrun in blue than I would say any of the clone spells or like, you know, Alondra Skydreamer. I've seen her do a lot of damage, but it's a really difficult thing to set up if you don't actually build around it.
Yeah, and that's kind of an outlier card, I'd say, for blue. Blue doesn't usually behave that way.
Doesn't really do that. Perplexing Test, really good one-sided board wipe. Bounces everything, all tokens or everything that isn't tokens. I love that card.
Yeah.
Okay, blue's also pretty bad in the same category at board presence. Just having stuff that says don't hit me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the other side of the coin from being good at instants and sorceries. Instants and sorceries do a thing, but they don't sit there on the board as a board presence. And so because they're so good at that, they kind of give up in this other realm of like advancing their board in obvious ways. This can be an upside and a downside, but they generally, especially early in the game, the more heavily blue a deck is, it often doesn't have like a ton of stuff out as you know, other colors do. Like white is going to commit to the board and have a lot of stuff out there, just a lot of cardboard pieces.
Yeah, I've just got 5 1/1s. I'm hard to hit.
Yeah.
And blue's like, I have a 2/1 flyer and a 1/3 with an ETB.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please don't hit me.
Please don't hit me.
Like, it doesn't even have what green has, which is like Death Touchers or Rattlesnakes. Like, it's just pretty much easy to attack. And I think when you're playing blue, that's a recognition that you need to have. That you're like, the early game, I'm going to take some damage. Like,
yeah, and I think if your opponents are playing correctly, if everything's kind of equal, you should be hitting the blue player, because if what you can see is equal, you should default to, well, what I can't see from blue is going to be more powerful than what I can't see from the others, because they're going to be able to deploy instant speed, weird, crazy stuff. Yeah. Because that is where their power is mostly in their hands and stuff that I won't see until it's happening. Whereas everybody else is going to project it onto the board. I'll get a chance to look at it before. Yeah.
Green develops its mana. White develops its creatures. Red develops quickly.
They have haste, so I'd say they're in a similar calorie.
They don't develop is the answer. Yeah. They just go.
They just go. There's no developing.
And blue develops its hand, and that is a much more secretive development. Yes. But if they're casting cantrips and they're casting little draw spells, chart of courses, those don't seem scary, but that means that their hand is better than yours.
Yeah, I'm always surprised after games when people will be like, oh man, somebody did such and such, and I didn't, that was out of nowhere or whatever. And I'm like, wait, no, because you just weren't following along because you couldn't see it. But it's like they drew 5 cards, they discarded to hand sides, and they cast this other thing that let them look at the top of their library. And then, so it was clear they were setting that up and they were about to do something. They got to choose their best 3 things from the top 20 or whatever. It's like, but people just have a hard time tracking that. It doesn't set off the alarms in their head. Whereas if you're a blue player, you're thinking about like, okay, Jimmy's done a lot of stuff that I can't see. When he starts going, it's going to be bad,
right?
Because he will have planned it. I'm going to do this, and I probably have protection also, and so you have to be extra vigilant. And blue's often that player that you should be extra vigilant about, and you should often be pressuring them because make them do stuff, make them put things down, because that slows down the other part of their plan.
If you can put them on the back foot, if you can hit them while they're beholding the multiverse, that's like where blue starts to get unsettled. And they're doing less pressuring your like what if mind. And you're just like, I don't care what if, I'm going to hit you with what I have. And it's a 3/3 ape. You're like, that's enough to do a bunch of damage. Like it wears a sword.
You got to do something about it eventually.
Got to start hitting.
Yep.
Okay. The next thing is permanent-based recursion. Once a creature or a enchantment goes to the graveyard, blue's like, it's gone.
Yeah.
I got nothing to get that
If it's
back.
not an instant or sorcery, it's dead. Yeah.
And I think that is a really interesting thing to deal with because usually it takes permanence to close out a commander game. So the fact that like if you wipe a blue player's board, they're like, I think it's good. Like I'm not going to be able to recover
in big trouble.
from this.
And my whole plan could be out the window as far as like I was going to do X and Y and Z, but I was counting on that enchantment surviving.
Right.
And a lot of times it's an enchantment because or an artifact because they're harder to get rid of.
Right.
Blue players are usually smart enough to build their deck not to just function around a creature that could die. But then you're like, it's not that I can't win. It's just like I have to reformulate a brand new plan of how to
now
get
I have
there.
to find it, and it's going to take a long time because blue's slow to win the game. So like if they present a threat, that's the threat.
Yeah.
This is my baby.
And they usually won't put it out there until they have ways to protect it.
Exactly. And that's what I think we talk about here is like
That's the
you
balance
just
of-
can't let it go to the graveyard.
Yeah.
You phase it out. You bounce it back to your hand. You counter the removal spell. So when you stick a threat and you're the blue player, you need to prepare for somebody to answer that because you can't defend it if it's gone.
Yeah.
You can't get it back if it's gone.
Yeah, a lot of the other colors, definitely like green and black, you're like, I'm just going to run it out there. What's the worst that could happen? And a lot of times it's not that bad. It's, it dies, it gets bounced. You know, maybe exile would be bad. You have a sack outlet, though. You can be like, I don't care. I'll run it out there because, 15% of the time, no answer for it, and then I'm cruising. And if they do have an answer for it, I'll draw my Eternal Witness, my Bolligad Recovery, I'll reanimate it. It's not the end of the world for me. I have other ways to get it back out there later. So let's just see if I'm in the 15% here. But blue can't do that. They're like, okay, that's going to be a big part of my plan. I need to get to enough mana and with the right cards in hand to play it, have mana open, protect it. So that I can untap with it, and then I'm cruising. But I definitely can't just run it out there early and cross my fingers it doesn't die, because if it does, that's way worse for me than it is for the other colors.
Yep. So you have to recognize that you have to protect it, or you have to build your deck around non-permanent base win cons. So like a Blue Sun Zenith or something like that, where you do have great recursion for instants and sorceries.
Yeah, or build around, I think, like enchantments or cards that are just naturally harder to remove. Yeah.
Finally, and this one sort of has a question mark on it, is tutoring? Blue has like a lot of tutors. Like I was looking at it, there's tons.
Yeah.
And all of them are like, search for an instant that's 2 or less. You can go find a blue sorcery. And you're just like, why are you have so many rules?
Because they're trying to well, blue needs some tutors, but man, it's easy to make it not.
You can get an artifact that's exactly 3 mana. And you're like, what? This is such
But the problem is you say it like that, and then every one of those I'm like, that's really powerful.
It's a really good
because,
one.
Yeah, because that gets Cyclonic Rift. An instant with 2 mana, that gets the best card in your deck.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just like still too good. Yeah, I don't think they should be able to tutor for artifacts.
Anything,
they screwed up there. Like instants and sorceries, I think would have been okay, but they shouldn't give them artifacts as well. That should have been squarely red. And I think they've discovered that, and they don't give them artifact anymore. But Fabricate, War of Invention, they got to finish out this stupid cycle. The mages, but maybe they don't. Maybe they could stop right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think they shouldn't have gotten artifacts. But the fact that they are instant sorceries and artifacts, I think they're a decent tutor color. They're not as bad as red. And they're not as good as black, but they're in there with white's probably the second best.
I think it's like competitive with white.
Blue's like okay at tutoring.
Right. I think what you have to recognize is that if you're putting a tutor in your deck, you need multiple targets for it. You need a flexibility, and like having a little toolbox built around it goes a long way. If you're running one of these narrow tutors, making it feel less narrow is to your benefit. Makes your card much stronger.
Well, and one thing I'll say is that most tutors are instants or sorceries. So most of Blue's tutors can go find the other tutor if they can't directly get what you want.
Right.
And that is powerful. A worldly tutor can't go find a demonic tutor, but a mystical tutor can. So
Something I was looking at because I was definitely like, oh, blue has all these narrow tutors. And then I was like, well, Muddle the Mixture can find anything.
Yeah,
so can Tellurium West. Ew, Intuition can find anything. Obviously, that's a very expensive Magic card, but blue does have the tools to find just about anything it wants. So tutoring, I think, could probably be you recognize how blue tutors, but it's not really bad at it. Which is funny because that's kind of the end of the list. Like, that's what blue is bad at. And some of those are big things.
Yeah.
Like ending the game.
Yeah. And ramp.
And ramp.
Yeah.
But
we talked about a lot of mitigation for how to make these weaknesses not that weak. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I wanted to spend a second to be like, okay, but that doesn't mean that blue is like this perfect color that you should always play all the time. There's like very challenging parts about blue. And they're all sort of, I guess we've alluded to it. It's all sort of based on how you use the card.
Yeah, I think blue is the most difficult color to play, and in that could be a weakness. It is a hard color to play, and I screw up all the time, and you've seen it on Game Nights and Extra Turns, and play things out of sequence, make the wrong decision, and sometimes hindsight's 20/20, and how could you know in the moment? And sometimes it's very obvious. Well, what was I even thinking? And blue gives you the most ability to really screw up. And I think it all really boils down to similarities between that timing thing on counterspells. Of just like you do have a lot of choices and a lot of flexibility and a lot of interesting ways to use your cards, but a lot of them are sort of time restricted of sort of when they work and that window's narrow and pressure's on, and you don't have perfect information about what everybody's doing. A blue player, to be really effective, needs to really be focused on the game and aware of what their opponents are trying to do, and maybe even know sort of more cards that exist than somebody who's playing a more proactive color. Like, if you're playing a color and a deck that's proactive about its plan and it's trying to do its thing, and it's like, I'm going to make big creatures, I'm going to attack, and I don't care as much what you're doing. I have to know a little, but in general, I'm trying to go and I hope I don't get stopped. But when you're the stopper, you have to know, are they left-handed? Are they right-handed? Are they going to try and punch me in the stomach or the head? And if you try to block for the head and they go for the stomach, it's not good for you, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a harder, and that's why in a lot of games and a lot of sports, one of the ways to be successful is to be aggressive, be proactive, make others react, because a mistake when they're reacting to you is, more devastating than a mistake when I'm on the attack and I get stopped. And, so there you go. I think that's the hardest thing about blue, is just like, you got to be focused, you got to know all this stuff, and it's easy to make mistakes. And that gulf, like we talked about at the very start, of an experienced player with Brainstorm and an inexperienced player with Brainstorm, and how good the same exact card is in the same situation between those two people. That is a thing that I think you struggle with your entire career as a Magic player.
Yeah. Not to mention that, like, blue in multiplayer counterspells worse. Like, going 1-for-1 with one player means you're down cards on the other two players. It is not easy to play control against 3 opponents. They outnumber you.
Yeah.
So it's so much more important, if you're going to win with blue, to be able to recognize this is the one that's worth going down a card on.
Yeah.
And this is the player that I'm worried about the most, and I'm willing to go down cards against this player. But this player, I feel like, will be handled by the other players, or will be handled by themselves. Like, it's very, very difficult to be able to judge when it's time to act, to actually interact and stop something, when your life total's 40 and, like, you could just take the lick. When should I spend this bounce spell? Am I fine taking 8 here? What if I take another 12 next turn?
Yeah, it's a different proposition than 1v1, where your strategy could legitimately be, I'm going to just try and stop everything. But it's just not a realistic thing you can do in a multiplayer game. And so then you're down to, like, okay, if I can't stop everything, then I have to pick when I'm stopping. And now I have to know enough to pick the right things to stop. And that's a tough proposition. I would say there's even another layer in Commander that doesn't exist, which is there's also sort of the social part of it, where you also kind of have to judge the player's reaction to what you're going to do to them. How much is this going to sort of piss them off? Because if I stop something and it makes them react in a way that, like, they zero in on me as, like, their target because they're really mad about what happened, that can be worse for me than letting the thing go. And that is really more of an art than a science, and, complicates it even more, which I think is a fun part about Magic. And I like social interaction games, I used to like to LARP, and I like games like Werewolf and things like that. And that's there's that layer of it that blue really has to sort of at least be aware of. It's hard to just be a player playing blue with counterspells. And if you just don't want to acknowledge people's emotions, I think you're not going to be as good as if you kind of factor them in.
Yeah, I mean, recognizing that, like, yeah, this card might be bad, but they've got a pretty scary board right now. And if they send that all at me for countering their commander, I'm not going to be able to stop that.
Yeah. So my best hope might be, even though it's right to counter it, let it resolve and hope it all doesn't come at me right now.
Yeah.
And that might just be a higher percentage chance for you to win that game than countering it is. Where I counter it and it guarantee comes at me.
A big recognition when you're playing Commander is recognizing when something is your problem and when that's somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of playing blue is being like, okay, if this resolves, whose problem is it right now? Is it mine? Is their value going to spiral past the point that I can control them? Maybe that's my problem. Is it going to be big, but I also have a bounce spell in my hand? That's not my problem until it's my problem.
Right.
Where like it's coming at me and I can effectively manipulate it. So
I also think about where I'm sitting in relation to that player. Will other players have a chance to act, or am I going to be the next to act anyway? And also, what colors are my other players in? Is that a permanent type they're good at handling or not? Yeah. So if it's an enchantment coming down, the other players are like in Rakdos. It's like, well, there's unlikely my opponents are going to be able to answer it if it hits the board. I might have to stop this now because I can't answer it once it hits the board. And so here we go.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, but you get in countless situations where later on you're like, I probably should just let that happen. This other thing that happened later was way worse than that. And I could have survived a turn or two with that thing on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough. I think the big thing about winning games with blue is patience.
Yes.
Recognizing that you're slow, but that's okay, and hitting your land drops, developing your hand, taking a couple licks early. If you go out of the gate and you counter something right away, they're going to murder you.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to die right away. Like, if you counter a cultivate, is that worth it? Is that worth it?
I don't think so.
No, because they're mad now.
All things being equal, they're coming at you for at least the first few turns.
That being said, though, like, if I'm in white, I'll kill a Soul Ring on turn 2.
Yeah.
And it's because I know that if somebody's faster than me, I'm not going to be able to develop the way I need to. So it's like, I think that there's an argument for countering a Soul Ring on turn 1, but it sort of depends on the deck.
Yeah, it's those kind of tough calls, though.
Yeah.
That are fun, but also like have you kicking yourself later. Like, I should have done that, or maybe I shouldn't have. But you never know.
It has a lot to do with your play group too. Okay, so blue doesn't often work alone, as many of the colors in Commander don't. So we're going to talk about what happens when you pair blue with other colors. It's the most common thing, but I think recognizing we know all these good things and all these bad things about blue. Now, when I pair them with other colors from like the How to Play Red episode, we know the good things and the bad things about red. When I pair those two colors, you need to recognize like what red is going to handle best, what blue is going to handle best, and what they work best at together, what they can sort of add to each other's resources. So we're going to go through each of the colors, but I want to make sure that like if you're playing two colors, obviously you're going to play some of the medium, like things blue's medium at. But if you're playing three colors, you should really only be playing cards that each color is excellent at.
Yeah.
Because now that's the strength of three colors, is you can basically do whatever you want as efficiently as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, a good example is like green in general has the best creatures. And so if you pair something with green, very often green is contributing most of the creature part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not always because of synergies, but very often.
Their creatures are bigger and more efficient, and they're just designed to be a creature color.
Yeah.
But most of your card draw is probably blue.
Exactly, because they're not as good as. You might have a Guardian Project, but you're probably not relying on a bunch of the other green cards because you don't need it. You've got really awesome stuff from blue that's just better than what green's going to offer you. Mm-hmm. So that's a good way to sort of think about deck building. And so when you think about the colors as far as their strengths and weaknesses, it can really help you. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about pairing blue with white first of all.
Let's talk about white. So when you have a blue base and you're adding white, I think you're leaning on white for recursions, certainly permanent-based recursion, and I think that resilience that white offers, it's way better at protection than blue is. It's a lot less pinpoint and a lot more all my stuff.
Yep.
White's creature and just permanent removal is significantly better. You can hit artifacts, enchantments, creatures efficiently and permanently.
You just don't play Pongify like we said. You play Swords to Plowshares. There's just no reason to have that's just a trade you make 1 for 1 and you don't look back.
Yeah. And the board wipes in white are significantly better in terms of just answering problems and flexibility of board wipe. Like Austere Command can handle any number of problems that could be on the board.
Yeah. Farewell, Exiles, and you get to pick. Yeah, you probably still play Cyclonic Rift if, that's a power level that you're at, but that's probably it, right?
Yeah.
Like, blue doesn't have anything else that holds up to the rest of white's board wipes.
Yeah, otherwise I would just, if I'm not playing Cyclonic Rift, I would be playing all white board wipes. I wouldn't lean on like Evacuation or anything like that. And I think this is a big thing to keep in mind. Like, look at your blue-white decks. You're like, did I just throw in a bunch of blue staples? Am I playing Pongify and Rapid Hybridization? Why?
Yeah, you can't just go on an EDH rec and be like top 100 cards from each color and then just put those in a deck. Yeah, the overlap you're going to have to look at and go like, hey, I want white's removal and not blues. I don't need...
Yeah. Am I playing Chasm Skulker, which is a blue token card, or am I playing white to make a board?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a much better color for those kind of things. So it gives you the ability to look at your deck list critically and understand what color you're using for what. I love when white and blue combine because you get a very defensive color that's very like tricksy.
Yeah. They have the most instants combined, right? Those two colors. So they are naturally the most reactive. Because when we went through the numbers you talked about, they have the most flash. Because white was second in both of those categories. And so I think this really plays into this control-y aspect. And that's why Azorius has that reputation, deservedly so. Yeah, because together they are the Pillow Fort colors.
Yeah.
They've got the Propagandas and the Ghostly Prisons and the Aetherizes and the things like that. They combine. They have the Evasion. They're the flying colors as well. So that's also... And evasion's weird, but it works in with control because what you do is you get one thing out that just can get in. You stop everything else, and you're just like, yep, hit you for 5. Remove that, stop that attacks me, bounce it, hit you for 5, and it's like that inevitability from the evasion is really important.
Yeah, they're defensive colors. So you like, it's sort of, you build up a wall and you shoot arrows from the top. Like you have to be able to defend yourself while you're attacking. And if you can only attack with one creature with evasion, perfect. I want to keep everything else back.
Yeah, they're the stacks colors as well.
Slow you down. Both colors are about time.
And rules. They're like, put some rules in place.
we were talking about this where like, they're both the colors of inevitability. White's great in the end game.
Yeah.
It can grind all day. And where it's like, if you can have your stuff come in tapped, blue's like, oh great, I can commit something to the board right now and not be worried about a creature coming out of
Yeah,
door.
Blind Obedience is out. Talrand's a much easier proposition.
Yeah,
right?
now I can hold maybe I'll hold up like a bounce spell or something like that.
I'm not as worried.
But I'm not worried I'm going to die right now.
Yeah.
So it's about slowing things down and your deck succeeding in the late game. I think if you're playing blue-white, you don't need as much ramp. You need the card draw to hit your land drops. You need efficient creatures to play early. You need your blink spells to reuse them. You're just waiting until everybody else
sort of peters out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or just gets tired from the pressure of like having to pay too much mana for stuff and not it coming in tapped. Yeah.
Bounce your stuff. It comes in tapped.
You did mention Blink, which we should mention.
We should, yes.
They're the Blink colors as well. They're the main Blink colors. And so when those two get together, they're really good at getting maximum value off of their ETBs. Yeah. And that's just a thing that they do, which I think has to do with the inevitability. Like they're going to reuse and set up some kind of an engine that says, okay, I'm just going to keep getting this effect. Can you beat that? I'll stop whatever you play.
Yep.
How are you going to,
I'm going to hold up 2 spells. One's a blink spell, one's a counter spell.
Yep.
And if I don't have to spend the counter spell, I'm going to spend a blink spell, draw another card.
Yep.
And
I'm going to do that every turn. So what do you got?
This only gets worse for you. So that's blue and white, predictably very slow, very controlling, and inevitability for sure. When you combine it with black, now we get the combination of blue's mill and black's recursion.
Yeah.
Black's removal, tutors, board wipes again.
Yeah, you don't want to play, again, the removal from blue for the most part, you can rely on black. The only thing I'll say is blue has some 1 mana stuff, whereas black really doesn't have that much. That's like...
It's usually 2 mana, and it can kill creatures or planeswalkers, is what we expect from black removal these days.
Yeah, but you definitely don't want to play Fabricate and stuff. You can just play Demonic Tutor. I mean...
If you're playing tutors, just play Demonic Tutor.
Yeah, black's tutors get anything.
Yeah, and if you're not playing tutors, then play blue's card draw. But it's recognizing that, like, if you're playing tutors, use the good ones.
Yeah.
And then something that you mentioned, which I think is really cool, is blue can recur non-creature permanents or non-permanents from the graveyard, and black can recur creatures from the graveyard, and you get into these like cool grindy loops where you're like, I'm gonna play a extra turn spell and I'm gonna reanimate an Archaeomancer, which is gonna get back the reanimate, or the extra turn spell. It has the extra turn spell. So you can start looping creatures in and out of the graveyard, which helps you loop your instants and sorceries.
Yeah, a lot of reanimation spells are instants and sorceries, and
especially the best ones.
Yeah, and a lot of things that get back your instants and sorceries are creatures, and because black's good at getting creatures and blue's good at getting instants and sorceries, you just have a lot of synergy, and they're both good at getting things into your graveyard. So you're like, cool, just dump all that stuff in there, and now I'll just start to churn through it. And that's why a lot of Dimir decks are self-mill decks.
Right.
Yeah.
Like Scarab God is a great example of like what blue and black look like when they're together. You mill a bunch, you get value creatures out of the graveyard to be your threats, to set up this like huge stack of scries and drain the table. I like living death loops with Archaeomancer is always the best. So you can have living death every single turn. Gross. Don't do that to your friends.
Yeah,
it's really fun.
Yeah, everybody on the bot will hate it, but they'll like it the first time. The first time they'll be like, that's cool. And then the second time they'll be like,
okay, pick a new thing to cast. You pick living death one more time, I swear. I think those two things combining is the cool strength of blue and black. I love being able to use the graveyard for literally anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like your graveyard is just your hand when you play those two colors, and that's one of the really fun things about it. It's like, I got 6 cards in my hand and actually have 29 cards because my graveyard has 20 cards in it or whatever.
Yeah, it's as perfect as card selection gets, really. When you combine blue with red adds direct damage. Thank goodness.
A way to win, yep.
And generally speed.
Yeah.
Like red says you can do everything a turn earlier. I can give it to you faster. And the cool thing that I like about that is blue says slow and pick your time perfectly. And red says that time can be any time.
Yeah.
It might be right now and it might be in 10 turns from now. But it gives you that acceleration where it's like maybe the window is on turn 4 and blue would normally not be set up to be able to hit the gas at that point.
Right, but red kind of gives you that acceleration. Gives you that gas.
Yeah.
Nice.
Haste for your tappers and your untappers is great. It's also really good with artifacts, so they work well with that kind of stuff.
And rituals, I think, is another big thing that red gives. Even though red doesn't have a ton of them, it's got 2 really big ones, and Mana Geyser and Jessica's Will. And I love Mana Geyser. I'm a huge fan of Mana Geyser. And I believe that, you can win a lot of games by just Mana Geysering, and then whatever you can do with the 27 mana you just got. And blue is going to guarantee that you'll have enough cards to use all of the mana you get. And even if you don't win, just putting 27 mana worth of almost anything out is just, it presents the problem of like, well, board wipe, get rid of it all, or that's going to win almost no matter what it was.
And I have the blue protection to defend what I just did.
Yeah, exactly.
Because red is such a glass cannon. Red is like, gas! So they interrupted. Well,
yeah.
All right. That's the game.
Yeah.
And sometimes the gas is enough, but blue says like, oh, you thought you had a board wipe, but I have a counterspell.
Yeah, you need 2 board wipes. Maybe you need 3, because I go Mana Geyser, cast all this stuff, hold up for, 4 more mana, go, and they're like, crap.
Something that's interesting when you combine these 2 colors is I do think the flash becomes less important because you have the haste from red and you have the mana acceleration from red.
Interesting.
And so you're more in control of when things happen, that like you can make decisions a little bit earlier because they happen right now, where blue is a little bit like, I have to wait, I have to be careful. So the flash is good, but like when you have haste, I can do it now or I can do it later.
Yeah, I think it just presents you with flexibility where you're like, in this case, I'm going to go for it now because, it will normally have to wait a turn, but this is going to have haste or it's going to, happen a turn earlier or something like that. But they still do have setups because they do the Spellslinger thing, which red and blue are really sort of the storm colors. And, when you combine Wheel of Fortunes and stuff, because you would think red wouldn't add any card draw, and you don't want any of the impulsive draw, but this Wheel of Fortunes are so good or just wheels, I guess, not Wheel of Fortune, but like there's a bunch of wheels in red are so good with triggering off of all of blue's stuff that says when you draw a card, do things. And then blue's so good at triggering all red stuff that says when you cast an instant sorcery, do things, Stormkiln Artists and stuff like that. Red actually provides mana in a weird way to the blue, and blue's saying like, I'll provide the cards for the most part. And that flywheel is super powerful, but it does require some setup. So I think there's that style of deck as well. So it's interesting that blue and red can combine in kind of a couple of different ways. Yeah, and then they're just pure wheel decks, right, that are often blue-red based that are going to punish your opponents for drawing cards too, which is, another way that they can even go. So yeah.
I like that blue says you can do a lot of stuff, and red says when you do stuff, I hurt you.
Yeah, exactly.
And because
blue has trouble with that second part.
Yeah. Blue can spin its wheels all day. Yeah. Red's like, you're spinning? Nice.
Yeah.
Burn.
You spin that wheel enough, it'll catch on fire.
Red's not always good at like the doing stuff part because it runs out of cards, or it's used all of its mana, or it's just like gets blown out. And blue's like, don't worry, we're not getting blown out.
Yeah. You'll have stuff to do.
Yeah. It's that's how you get the cool is it vibe when blue and red come together. And it's funny, it does the same thing when you have artifacts, because it creates a different flywheel, but it's effectively the same engine as a storm.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, where it just kind of they build on each other. One provides one part and the other provides the other, and they just keep flywheeling.
Finally, when you combine blue with green, you get the most
I don't know if
what's
it's the
word
most
I'm looking
broken,
for?
But it's
not broken. I was going to say infamous kind of color
I think
combination.
It's the easiest to break.
Certainly. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's why it has a reputation that it does, because it's not difficult to put these two things together. It's actually difficult to put blue and green together and not have something powerful.
Right.
It's because the things that they do naturally, which is one provides a ton of card draw, and the other says. And then the downside of that, which we already said, is, but you have a lot of cards, but you can't deploy them all. And green says, hey, I'll give the second half of that in two ways. I'll give you a ton of mana so you can cast it all. But also, the other problem with just drawing 20 cards is a significant portion of those are going to be in lands.
Yeah.
Well,
or more draw spells.
Yeah. Well, green says, guess what? I'll even let you play more lands.
Yeah.
What does that do? Oh, it gives you more mana to cast more spells. And that is a flywheel. That's just like one feeds the other so well that it's from that position, it's hard to screw up, because whatever else is left, whatever portion of your deck is not producing mana, putting more lands into play, or drawing cards, you're just going to be able to do so much of that other thing. It doesn't matter what it is. Is it artifacts? Is it creatures? Is it whatever it is? You'll do it enough. It could just be landfall triggers. That'll be good enough. Like you're going to do that a lot enough to win.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the classic. It's the peanut butter and jelly of Commander, right? It's ramp and it's card draw. Yeah. And when you have both, that means you can both have a bunch of stuff to do and a lot that you can do with it. You're going to lean on green, of course, for your mana production and your board presence, the creatures that we already mentioned already, but also your threats. Green's great at ending the game.
Yeah, they cover all of blue's weaknesses, right? Those top weaknesses.
Right.
Yeah, you don't play mana rocks. You play mana dorks. You play rampant growth and stuff.
Rampant growth, explorations.
Yeah.
Like
burgeonings.
I almost like an exploration over a rampant growth when I'm playing blue and green, because it's just like, well, I'm going to have all the cards. I might as well have a free rampant growth every turn.
It's also just harder for them if they catch it later to hurt you, right? Like rampant growth got you one extra land into play for that card and a mana rock or whatever, or a mana dark, they could kill it. But in exploration, by the time they get to it, unless they got it right away, you might have already got 3 extra lands into play from it. Well, get rid of the exploration now. It doesn't matter. That advantage has already been realized.
It's happened, yeah.
Yeah.
There's like even more narrow synergies where like green has huge mana dorks and blue has the untappers, right? So it has your Circle of Dreams Druid that adds for each creature you control. And then blue's like, well, I have a creature that untaps it. So now I have twice as much mana as the number of creatures I control. The extra land drops is huge, but also where green's biggest downside is I have to commit a big scary thing to the board and pass. And blue says, I got it. I'll protect that. Or you can flash it in on end step and we'll protect it then.
Yeah, I think green's 2 biggest downsides are, like you said, deploy big threat, but can't use it now. And the fact that the big threat can come in and either be protected by blue, so still cast it now, but can't use it till later, but blue says, don't worry, I'll help you get to later. Or blue says, no, we'll just not cast it until right before you can use it. And both of those turn green's stuff into like power, they exponentially increase the power of a thing. Just, if you cast an exclamation and then pass, a lot of bad things can happen. Not just it getting killed, it can get cloned like we said earlier or whatever, but if you cast on the end step before your turn and untap, and now instead of 9 mana you have 27, that's a totally different problem for the table. That's the difference between, decent chance that it gets removed and it doesn't matter that much to decent chance you win. Yeah.
Yeah. The tricksiness of blue makes all of the rage of green so much more powerful. Okay, so, we've spent a lot of time talking about how powerful blue is, how difficult it is to play against, but I don't want to leave this episode without giving people tips about what to do if they're across from a blue player. Because I think people play against blue in Commander incorrectly.
Yeah. They get frustrated by it, and I think it has a reputation as being too powerful, especially when you start out. Like we said, counterspells feel kind of broken. You don't understand the downside of them. And the answer to blue is often not exactly the cards, and that people expect the answer to things in Magic to be the cards, but it's often like how you're playing and what you're doing.
Right.
So a big thing against blue, because we've mentioned this whole time, like you get this hidden advantage of people give you credit for a thing even if they don't know you have it. They play suboptimally. They don't play their best thing. They sometimes play their second best thing because they're worried about what you're going to do to it. So I think people need to, that's playing into blue's hands. Because what it's saying is, like, even when I don't have a counterspell, sometimes I still stop you from doing the best thing.
Right.
Make them have the thing. Most, more than you do. There are times, I'm not going to say there aren't times when you have to play around a counterspell. You do. But those moments are way less often than you think.
Yeah.
For the most part, make them have it and make them use it. If they've used it, you've opened the door for them to be, attacked or in some way their shield's down so that somebody else can do something to them, or maybe you can get a second play, and even if it's not the best thing, get you an attack in or whatever. But make them have the thing, make them show it to you, make them cast it, make them use their mana.
Yeah, it's like playing against an Aetherflux Reservoir, right? You're not going to let them sit at 55 life and not attack them.
Yeah.
Go. Make them, if they're going to kill you, make them kill you. Then they're dead right after that.
Yeah.
So, you can't just sit and be afraid of what would happen. Something that's a great way to combat counterspells or combat mono blue is there's a huge downside to leaving mana open, because if they don't give you anything to counter, then you can't spend your mana. But if you cast a couple of small spells, is nothing convenient for them to counter. So you can still progress your board by casting a mana rock, casting a 4-mana spell, and not slamming your big thing into a counter spell, but just being like, I'm going to cast 2 3-drops. That's so much less powerful to counter than 1 6-drop.
Yeah, you think of it as their one counter. Instead of getting the one thing you do, it gets 1/3 of the things you do. And even if it's the best 1/3, you still got some amount through versus none amount through.
Right.
Yeah, and I would say to people that have a blue player in their playgroup that terrorizes them, lower the curve on all of your decks.
Yeah.
That's one of the key ways that you're going to make their deck just naturally less powerful, because they can't. It's harder for them to pick off a lot of pieces than it is to pick off singular big pieces. So yeah, pressure them, pressure their life total. Like we said earlier, if a blue player has less on the board than everybody else, it doesn't mean that they're behind. They're often ahead. You just can't see. You just can't see the part of that's making them strong, because that is part of the color. They're sculpting their hand. They're getting the perfect cards in there. They're getting ready to make the sequence of plays, and you have to interrupt that. You mentioned the CGB episode with the deck, and the deck where he's playing everything at instant speed is the new Chromium. Chromium.
New is a strong word, but yes.
Sorry, new to
Newer.
me. It's not the OG Chromium, which is bad.
Like 2019 or something.
And in that game, I think it's in the episode where I'm like, we just have to go at him. I'm just going to, I'm like, the only chance we have, and we might not still win, is just throw everything, make him have it, and we just don't think. Everything we can do, we do it, and we just go. And can he answer it all? Maybe, but let's find out. And we just start, we just ignore each other, and we just start going. And he still wins the game, but we did at least have a chance to crack the armor, where the blue player's advantage is when the other players are fighting amongst themselves and they can pick what to answer. If you're like, hey, you got to answer everything, let's see if you can do it, you have a much better chance.
Yeah, for sure. Remember that blue players are typically slow, unless they're in blue-red or in blue-green, which are very explosive combinations, but that's not because of blue, that's because of the other ones.
Right.
You have time against the blue player, so you don't have to rush to kill them. You apply pressure steady with a 3-drop. If you hit them every turn for 4, there's not a very impactful thing for them to interact with, and they don't want to spend their 1 removal spell on this little thing. So you have time to kill them. You just need to apply pressure.
Yeah, you don't have to worry too that you can stick your neck out a little bit farther as far as like, maybe against a red player, even with no board presence, a board wipe has just happened, you're going to want to hold, if you're at really low lives, hold a removal spell open because you don't know what haste creature might come out or whatever. Sure. But against blue, you don't have to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not, whatever's going to happen, it'll take a minute of setup.
Right.
Yeah, I can maybe commit a little bit more here.
And that sounds like a counter, like, I don't mean it to be a counter to what we just said. You have to apply pressure to them, you have to attack them, but you just don't have to be afraid of them in the same way that you're afraid of other decks.
Absolutely.
So you have to evaluate them on a different axis. Because time is their friend and not yours. If you keep them alive longer, they get more powerful. So you have to apply a steady pressure to kill them, but you don't have to be worried about like, oh God, I'm going to be dead.
Just make them do things. Make them do things that you can see. Mm-hmm. Remove things, counter things. Make them feel like I got to get a blocker out there. I'm taking too much damage. I got to make a move earlier than I want to. Mm-hmm. That's how you make the blue player uncomfortable. I'll tell you, in the scenarios we talk about where I say, have a lot of instant speed stuff in your hand so that if Jimmy goes for something big, you can counter it. But if he doesn't, you'll pull from tomorrow and draw 12. Every blue player in the world would rather do the pull from tomorrow parts, right? That's what they want to happen. Now, they're willing to do the other thing if they have to, but don't let them do the thing they want to do. Make them do the thing they don't want to do, which is stop you from doing stuff. So present things that they feel like they need to stop. Yeah, and don't be as scared that they are going to stop it. You can even see sometimes where like, hey, you can see it in your mind as that was a win. They countered my thing. But you don't get to see it. They'll never tell you. But what you didn't see was they didn't pull for tomorrow for 12. So instead of having 11 more cards in their hand, they just 1-for-1 to you.
That's great.
Yeah, that's actually a win in your book because they could have 11 for 0 that be 11 cards up on the table.
Right.
But instead, they're kind of 2 cards down to 2 of the opponents and even with you. Yeah. And you just have to kind of recalibrate your brain against blue.
For sure.
I want to say before we go here, because we're wrapping it up, it's been a long episode, but I feel like the Bloomborough episode of Game Nights, which I'm not sure, is this coming out? If this is after Duskmorn, it'll be one ago, and if it isn't, it'll be the last one.
But anyway, it's after Duskmorn, yeah.
Okay, the one with Dr. Lupo. I played the Miss Bumbleflower deck, which is a fun deck and a group huggy deck, but is a control-y deck.
Yeah, for sure.
And I thought that I navigated that game particularly well, as far as like I thought my deck was good, not as powerful as maybe as any of the decks, but definitely not as powerful as Olivia's or Dr. Lupo's deck. But I was able to remove key pieces, stop Dr. Lupo from winning, keep Jimmy down, and I didn't win the game. Sorry, spoiler alert. But I did maneuver myself to a point where I actually thought I was advantaged near the end when it was 1v1 with Olivia. And I had to fade one draw step from her, and I made the determination of like, what are the chances she can do direct damage to me? She didn't have any haste, and I had a Hull Breacher Horror out. I got to a position where I basically... boards were empty, except I had a Hull Breacher Horror. It wasn't exactly Hull Breaker, sorry. Hull Breacher Horror.
That's really scary.
They're going to make that card. It's going to get banned. A Hull Breaker Horror and some untapped mana going into her turn empty board. And I thought, I can stop almost anything she can do. As far as like, I don't have a counterspell, but I can bounce anything scary.
Right.
And then I'm going to untap with it. And it's over from there. She won't be able to do anything impactful for the rest of this game. Now, there was a new card that did direct damage to me that I didn't see coming. But like, that is, I think, a pretty textbook game of where blue sits as far as its comfortability. Obviously, you can play it in different ways. But like the most common way that blue wants to be played, I think that game is like a really good example of it.
And like we say all this to give you the tools to build blue in a way that blue is most comfortable. You can obviously break all these rules. That's what Commander is for, right? If you want to play mono blue like Stompy and do big sea monsters and that kind of thing, sick. Yeah. Do that. But you have to recognize that what blue is best at, what blue offers that is being able to flash in your threats. And it's going to struggle with the ramp side. So you have to make sure the ramp side is supported. So it just gives you the understanding to like, when I'm building blue, what do I have to keep an eye on? What do I know blue is best at? And how can I play the deck in a way that blue is going to support best? It's really fun to break rules in terms of card and in terms of deck building. But understanding what the colors bring to the table makes you better at breaking the rules.
Yeah, it's like they say, like you're like Prof was an English major, right? And he would probably tell you, like, you have to know the rules to break them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very common thing in, like, writing and all kinds of stuff. And I think, no one's saying don't play the Sea Monsters deck or don't play some off-kilter. You know, Murph has a really cool, like, Esper lands deck,
rules,
right?
Yeah.
But that's, you know, there's no green there. How's it a lands deck? And those are really cool things to build and puzzles to give yourself. But you can do that better when you know what, you know, the color is, you know, the most comfortable doing. Doesn't mean don't do the other things.
Blue mages, to the listeners, what is your favorite thing about playing blue? Do we miss any of the colors pitfalls? Anything that we should have brought up? I don't know. We covered a lot. What's your
we probably
favorite?
Missed some stuff.
I'm sure we did. What's your favorite tech to shore up the weaknesses of blue and pilot your blue decks to victory? Favorite blue cards in the chat. Let's do it. And if you want to pick up any of these blue cards that we discussed, go to cardkingdom.com/command. Card Kingdom has this huge selection of all of the cards that you're looking for. We talked a lot about bounce spells. Maybe you want to go pick up a capsize.
Capsize.
I like any of the bounce spells. I like any of the bounce spells that also draw a card, like the kicker ones, where it's like return an on-land permanent, draw a card. Oh, nothing
so
feels
good.
freer in the world than getting to do those little tempo moves. And you can pick them up at Card Kingdom. They've got a huge selection. So if you want one art or you want one version, or you're like, you know what, I want to save a little bit of money, I'm going to get a slightly worse condition on this one. It's great to be able to shop from a place that has a huge selection. You can get a ton of cards all in one place. Plus, they're going to be shipped to you professionally, and the cards that you order on the website are the ones that show up on your doorstep, safe and sound, in a little plastic box with a little pack of peanut to keep it safe.
Yep.
They're so smart over there. Cardkingdom.com/command.
Yeah, and of course, once you get those cards, all these new blue cards that you're about to get, make sure that you dress them up in some Mana 8 blue Ultra Pro deck boxes. They got Apex sleeves. They got playmats. They got binders.
Giant blue drop over the horizon. I love the insides are blue. I think that's so
it's awesome. The really high quality, looks really great and classy. Obviously, they have them for the other, you know, lesser colors as well. But if you listen to this episode, I'm pretty sure you're gonna.
I don't know if you noticed, every one of these is white, Josh. They're all white. Couldn't leave white out.
UltraPro.com/command is the place to go to get all that stuff. And of course, we always mention it, but it's true. They have tons of great deals on their website all the time. So worth checking out just for that.
And before we go, we're going to say thank you to our amazing team here at the Command Zone. Thank you to Eric Lem, Rachel Kender, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Block, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Josh Murphy, Manson Lung, Karina Cruz, Jared Robinson, Sebastian Salazar, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, and Jimmy Wong. And of course, to the blue expert himself, Josh Lee Kwai.
And to Rachel Weeks, everybody.
To me.
Even though she likes white. All right, thanks for watching.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @Josh Lee Kwai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.